All right, and we're live. Hello, I am Eugene Marshall of Arcanist Press and Sigil Entertainment, and this is Sigil Spotlight. We are a diverse community of tabletop industry creators spotlighting each other's work. Welcome to the final Saturday episode of Season 1 of Sigil Spotlight. This episode will be looking back at the sessions we've played, discussing our thoughts on tabletop role-playing game design, talking about our creative processes, and sharing our current projects. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Sigil Entertainment for supporting the stream and providing our graphics and overlays. Roll20 for providing us a virtual tabletop, and Wizards of the Coast, and Pinnacle Entertainment, and Monty Cook Games, and our own creators for providing us the systems and content for our fun. I will mention this, though I don't think they're going to be necessary today, I hope. But we do employ safety tools. So thanks to Brebo Sheldon, Lauren Bryant Monk, Kiana Shaw, and Monty Cook Games for providing those tools for us. Now, the show notes below are extra full today because not only do they have links to things like the safety tools I've just mentioned, but they have links as well to at least something from all of today's creators. So feel free to visit those and click through to visit people's content on DM's Guild or DriveThru or Itch and whatnot, or their websites as well. So let's go ahead and get to know our participants today, our players. As I said, I'm Eugene Marshall. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I am co-owner of Arcanist Press and a lead game designer for Sigil Entertainment, and I am the, master of ceremonies today. Though normally I'm often the GM, I guess. Let's go ahead and go around and let people introduce themselves, pronouns, and tell us a little bit about what you do in tabletop gaming. Why don't we start with Ish?
Yes, my name is Ismael Alvarez, otherwise known as Ish or Laura Thorn or Elven Wizard King. I use he, him pronouns. In fact, I should throw those on the thing. But I do a decent amount of writing for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, primarily under Fat Goblin Games. And yeah, I enjoy doing a lot of writing and playing and running of games in that oeuvre, although I do like other systems as well.
Excellent. And how about you, Vic?
Hey everybody, Vic, he, him, they, them. I also go by VJ Harris professionally, so I'm the DM's Guild. And I guess I had a kind of a slow start being on the stream and like working on D&D stuff. Like I had my first product out, and now I'm on like 4 or 5 different projects right now. But all 5th edition, most of them, 2 of them surrounding like orcs and like race within D&D.
Cool.
Another one is part of the charity, and another one's for the new Mythic Odyssey of Theros coming out in a couple days.
Cool. We'll talk more about all of these forthcoming projects. Well, any that you are at liberty to discuss, we can talk about these later. Gilbert, would you like to go next?
Hey, I'm Gilbert S. I am one of the non-D&D designers on this group. Lots of little projects. I'm with a newly formed group called the Unnamed Game Company. A friend and I have combined together because I'm not very good at talking to people and he is. So, but yeah, we have like a number of projects, but a lot of it got really like stalled out because of all the COVID stuff. And I don't really have a lot of ways to play test. So I've had to like ground myself, but there's a lot of projects we're planning and releasing this year.
Fantastic. I look forward to seeing those. And how about you, Jess?
Hi, I'm Jessica Marcrum. You might see me down in the chat as Nerd Girl. And I write games and supplements, and a lot of it is for 5e. Some of it is not. I've written some Powered by the Apocalypse. I've written some Powered by the Apocalypse hacks that are on my itch page, as well as my most recent game is a Lasers and Feelings hack called Dumpster Fire. So that's on my itch page as well. It's dedicated to the year 2020. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do. Oh, in real life, I'm a social worker therapist. So I sensitivity read for mental health stuff too.
Fantastic. And there is a gap in our overlay because Connor is traveling and perhaps he'll be able to get Zoom to work on his phone. But just in case, I left the spot open for him, because there's always a chair at the table for you, Connor. All right. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about games. So what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about, well, what we've done here in Season 1 of Sigil Spotlight. Kind of recap on the games we've played. Now, they're all available on our YouTube channel, as well as many of them have some highlights kind of excerpted too, if you don't have the time for the 3-hour session. And also talk a little bit about what people are working on now and how they work on that content, because I find that I learn an awful lot when I listen to other game creators talk about their process and their products. So just to recap, for those who don't know at home, or to refresh our memories, we've had 5 different adventures here on Sigil Spotlight Saturdays. The first, our premiere here on Saturday, because this channel does play games on Thursdays and Tuesdays also with 3 different groups. So the Saturday game, our first session was Curse of the Mariner's Heart by Jessica Marcrum, and it also featured the Apothecary class developed by Ismael Alvarez, and we also used a new mechanic for laying undead to rest from VJ Harris. The second session was Helping Hands. That was written by me, actually. And we got to see Jessica's Tabaxi subclass. That was the, not the Stray, that was the, which one was the, no.
That was the cat burglar.
Oh, yeah, the cat burglar. Yes, the rogue, right? The rogue subclass.
I have a lot of Tabaxi subclasses.
Tabaxi. And then the third session was From Every Winter Spring by Connor Self. And then we had A Day with the Fae by Jessica, and then The Shape of Madness by myself, and that we did with Tote was a multi-session, 2-session game. So we've had 6 sessions here, which is I'm pretty proud of. That was a good run for Season 1. So let's talk a little bit about each one. So I'd like to start with, we'll go in order. So Jessica, tell us how did you come to write Curse of the Mariner's Heart? Like what brought that about?
I was writing with a group of people to, Kat Evans got a bunch of us together to write midwinter ghost stories with a very British bent. Kat is Welsh, I believe, but she's, from there.
The UK.
And
sure.
In the style of, Victorian Brits sitting around a fire at solstice or Christmas telling each other ghost stories, and how ghosts and spirits are so common in that time period of Christmas stories and Christmas carols. Like there's Ghost in A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And so we got the idea of making a series of adventures set with this one family, the Lovelaces, and they're just horrible people, and they've been plagued for centuries, mostly as a result of their own horrible actions. So we built their home together, we made their family tree, and then we all went off and made our own adventures and fit them into a timeline. And we decided they were a seafaring family because a couple of us had ship-related adventures. I think one of them by Liz Guest takes place entirely at sea, but the rest of them are pretty much in this house in various states of decrepitude and decay. So mine is the second in the book, so it's early in the Lovelaces story.
So they're laid out chronologically in the book.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. So in your adventure, there was a reference to, Viola Ravenswood being spurned, spoiler alert, everybody, by, not Calpurnia. Calpurnia was the current one, by one of the earlier, right? Now that reference, that's not a reference to something that happens in the first adventure though, right?
No, I made them up pretty much. We set up a massive family tree. So that's in between the first adventure. And
very cool. So that's pretty awesome. So do we find out if we read the rest of the adventures, like what happens to the family?
Yeah.
I see. Very exciting. So
the one who spurned Viola is actually the sister of the main character from the first adventure.
Okay, very cool. So there are links between the stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
And how long ago did that come out? Last year?
Yeah, it came out last December, so December 2019.
Very cool. So that that adventure also, we got to see the apothecary class that you developed, Ish. What brought you to decide to develop that?
So the entirety of the book that the apothecary is in, the 5th edition horror, started out as a group project that we started doing with the Fat Goblin Games, and they like one by one people started dropping off until basically I wrote the entire book myself. And to help with the entire process, we started bringing in things from other, like, kind of horror themed things from other books that we had done for Pathfinder, so that it would be easier to convert rather than to build up new material. And the apothecary was a natural fit. It was something that we had done that had sold well in Pathfinder. And at least the subclasses are all me. So it has like the fields of study, which is forensic, chemistry, and medicine. And so I really try to custom tailor all of that to like the theme of horror, like what you see in horror movies when there's like the one character who uses like these weird pseudoscience methods to create like what is effectively magic or something close to it. And I'd say it worked out really well. And this was actually my second chance to play test, and it gave me a lot of ideas for how to go back and revise all of that.
Oh, very cool. So how hard was it? What was it like to convert? Because I've never converted Pathfinder to D&D. I mean, I guess I've converted 3.5 content, so I guess it's not that dissimilar. But I mean, was there a lot of like, because there seems to be probably more character options in the Pathfinder system than in 5th edition, right? So
yeah, and there are, and it was a lot of fiddling with loose bonuses and feats and things like that. So a lot of it was just trying to figure out what the closest approximation was to make something that would be fun, but at the same time kind of retain the essence of the previous one. A lot of just kind of eyeballing just how to change things, and like I said, I still have ideas for how to go back and change it, but for the most part, I think I did a pretty good job. I think it's a really fun class to play.
Oh yeah, I think it's got a lot of flavor. It's fun. And the forensic you did, because Anthamina your character was a forensic apothecary, and I enjoyed her quite a bit. So we also saw Vic, your new mechanic for laying the undead to rest. It was a super fun mechanic to see and play, but it's not something I would have initially thought, oh, I want to create that. Like, what brought you to create that?
Sometime last year, early last year, I ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist for a group of friends that I play with on Sundays, and I was going through I was looking at it and I was like, it's kind of boring how you can get rid of Leaf, the poltergeist that's in like the tavern that they can own. And I was like, I'd actually like something better than that, something more like thematic and like noteworthy. So I was like, okay. So I started like searching around for different, like if anybody else had done any like hard mechanics about like possessions and whatnot and how to like get rid of stuff. And I found this one blog that kind of like did like an overview of it, but hadn't was like, oh yeah, here's what real life possessions have entailed, right? So this is where you can take a basis from it. I was like, okay, cool. I still got to come up with the mechanics and figure out like how they interact with each other, but okay, fine. And so we never got around to using those mechanics. I actually kind of killed the players. Okay.
The players or the characters?
The characters. I killed the characters.
Important distinction.
I killed the characters.
Sorry. That's good.
I don't know how I did it. I think I added something onto it to like, because there were parts of it that just felt like it was missing, so I added an encounter on that killed all of them. And I was like, okay, I'm not DMing anymore for y'all. Like, somebody else take over. I'm tired. Like, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, like, just exhausted me. But so we didn't use it, but it was still like in my head, like, man, I really like these mechanics. And then finally I don't know, I guess I got more into like thinking about the DM's guild and stuff, and I was like, oh cool. And then I started working on it bit by bit, like mid to late 2019, and then had like a lull for a while, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna set a hard deadline. I'm gonna get this out on March 31st. So you got to get it done, and that's kind of where the whole process came from. Leaf was born.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Having played and run Dragon Heist myself, yeah, that section is like more. That was one of those places where I, as the DM, really wanted to I added more flavor. You know what I mean? Like that, and I could totally see. Yeah, and now once I saw it in action, in Jessica's Adventure, which was a perfect match, I thought. Right, that gothic, spiritualist kind of horror. It was great. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, was there? So, Jessica, curiously, just speaking of your adventure, was there any particular bits of fiction or game that you thought were most inspiring for The Curse of the Mariner's Heart?
Well, I pitched it as Home Alone meets a ghost pirate ship. Yeah. So I feel like a lot of times in adventuring, you are going in somewhere and you're exploring, you're doing all sorts of stuff. You're meeting the monsters where they live and rooting them out. And I wanted to do something where you are given a space, you have a limited time to explore it. That's why I put in the ticking clock. And you're given tools to set up traps to prepare your defenses. I've run it where people didn't set up traps at all. They were like, let's just loot this house. And it didn't go very well for them. But like, you have time in this house to do whatever you need to do before an invasion happens. And they just keep coming in waves. And Eugene, you were a lot nicer to us than than you can be in this. It's really easy to get overwhelmed in this adventure, depending on how you set it up. So I just wanted to give people an option of playing it from the other end, where you were trying to keep the hordes at bay.
Maybe. I mean, it was our first session together, right? And I don't know. I mean, I guess I was nicer than I could have been.
I once had a player go off on his own because he had no interest in fighting the undead. So what the rest of you don't know is the house actually seals you in. You can get out, but it's frozen. The doors are frozen shut. It's very hard to leave. So he kept trying to leave and decided the way to leave was to smash through the greenhouse.
Oh.
So he broke through the greenhouse, and there was a whole horde of skeletons there that just formed a funnel. So he got attacked he was a fighter in full plate mail, so it was very hard for them to hit him. But he got hit by about 20 skeletons a turn.
Yeah. That's
so
the greenhouse.
He was there alone in the greenhouse while everybody else was dealing with the adventure, and he was just there.
That's what he gets for opting out for premise rejection. You reject the premise of an adventure, and things go badly for you. It's I can't blame anybody but you for that one. I'm gonna go off while the rest of the party, is game for this. Well, I will say that's a time when I will sometimes be a little bit less charitable as a DM. Yeah, in the greenhouse, when reading it, I'm like, ooh, that's a deadly place. Don't go in the greenhouse when you're being attacked by the undead. I mean, this is like never get involved in a land war in Asia, and only slightly less well known as that, I mean, come on. So
I was so excited when I saw somebody from one of the other adventures had added a greenhouse. So I was like, yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's perfect. Like one of the things I really enjoyed about the adventure was, I mean, you had maps, but it's just the description and the mood. I really am I'm a sucker for an adventure or a story that evokes a mood. You know what I mean? Like, I just love atmosphere, and that just had a lot of it. I just could totally see like a Victorian house, right, with this like eccentric, weird old money family and all of the strange. Yeah, it was. I enjoyed that. Oh, look, we've got a Connor joining us, a sideways Connor. Let me go ahead and get him less sideways. Hi, Connor.
Thank you, Eugene. And hi, Connor.
Hey.
Hey, look
Hey,
at you
Connor.
outside in the world.
Hey.
Hello.
Oh wow, how you doing?
I'm doing grand. It was a very very uneventful trip, which I appreciate very much right now.
Yeah, really.
With everything going on, uneventful is great.
Well, I'm glad you could make it. We were just to bring you up to speed. What we've done is we did the introductions, and then we did a quick recap of here are the 5 or 6 adventures we've had, and then we've been walking through them one at a time. And the creators and people who contributed content have been talking a little bit about what happened. And then after that, I wanted to talk with everybody about their kind of creative process and what people are working on now. That's kind of the overview I was thinking. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we will move on to the next. Well, I might have a question or two more, but we can move on to the next adventure, unless somebody else wanted to talk about things.
Ooh, I do have something I want to add, but you first, introducing yourself.
Oh well, okay. So my name is Jonathan Connor Self. He, him. I am largely an Adventures League author, and I helped start a gaming charity, D8 Summit. And I am on remote from rural Georgia right now. So visiting with my quarantined family and taking a mental health break. So it's great to see everybody.
Yeah, it looks lovely there right now. I'm glad it's such a nice backdrop you've got there.
It's wonderful.
So, welcome. I'm glad you could make it, Connor. So, Vic, you said you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I guess I wanted to extol the virtues of having other people look at your stuff. Because I remember I did everything, the layout, the reading, the proofreading. Like it was a lot. But the important thing is I gave you the copy so that you could look it over, and you came back and it was like, hey, what's this DC? Like I had when there are a lot of moving parts inside of it. So like binding DCs and like other DCs you have to meet to keep the creature in during the exorcism. And I had done the binding DC, but I hadn't done I hadn't put inside of the adventure the DC you had it to keep making when you rolled your exorcism checks. Yeah. And so I was like, oh man, oh wow, I completely bungled that. And then in realizing that I hadn't done that DC, I realized I hadn't done the DC for the necromancer part either. So I was like, okay, let me just go in real quick and just did it. It was a quick, easy fix because I already had the ideas in my head, but I was like, I don't know how I missed that big chunk of the actual
mechanic.
Yeah, it's like the big meat of the mechanic, and I was just really lucky that I was a part of this group to give it to somebody else. It's like, hey, I don't know what to do here. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't even imagine proofreading something that I wrote myself. By the time I'm done writing something, I'm ready to throw my laptop at the wall. So usually I throw it at one of my friends and just say please read this and give it back to me, because at this point I don't even know what's in my head versus what's on the page anymore.
Right. Yeah. I have a horrible, I have done editing, professional editing work, both in my day job career as a college professor, as well as, not to mention, grading thousands of student papers, which I won't talk about because it's just unpleasant to think about right now. But, professional, I have edited volumes out that I did, and also game work. And so I guess I qualify as I am a professional editor, but I can't edit my own writing at all. I'm terrible. I mean, you don't know how many times I've gone over the same text again and again. Even this recent Kickstarter that I one of those things okay, more coffee, so I can reread it one more time, that sort of thing. And finally, I'm I had a professional editor look at it too, I might add, and she was amazing. But what do you know? either we all missed it or it got mixed up when it got inputted into InDesign for layout or whatever. We put the file out, I release it to my backers, and then I get like emails from the backers like that day, like, here's some typos. I'm like, how did everyone miss this? How did I miss it 100 times? So 100%, the more eyes, the better, man. That's just nothing, whatever. It's just like the no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's also that way with readers. I don't know if the rest of you had that kind of experience?
Okay. Yeah, most certainly. I've had to edit my own stuff before just due to lack of time or resources. And yeah, it's horrible because then you put something out and people notice right away. I couldn't recommend getting someone else to at least look at your writing. I can't recommend it highly enough because it looks so much more clean and professional. And no matter how good you think you are, you're gonna miss so many things.
Mm-hmm.
I did a talk this morning and I was with 2 other people and we had slides, and we realized right before the talk started that one of our names was misspelled on the slides that we made and we had all been looking at and working with. Oh
yeah, I've done that.
Yeah. As D8 Summit continues to grow, the adventures that we release in conjunction with our events, when we first started, we didn't have the backing or even necessarily the talent pool to have editors go over these early adventures that we had released. Now having grown that infrastructure, I couldn't imagine not having talented editors look over the adventures. When we're looking for teams to build for these adventures, besides trying to include people as co-writers so they could play off of each other's strengths, the first extra person we added was an editor for all of them. For that reason, because there's going to be things you're going to miss. Even if you're a talented editor, you're going to miss stuff in your own work. You're just going to. Because you don't look at it with the same eyes as that objective outside person is going to look at it. And having that person on your staff in the form of an editor can yield way better quality products from the get-go.
Absolutely, I agree. It's a poor substitute, but the only thing I've found that approximates that doesn't require you to have a patient and giving friends or the money to hire an editor is time. So if you set it aside for like a month, you forget it, so that when you come back to your own writing, like a significant amount of time later, you can see all the errors much more easily. And if you don't believe me, go look at something you wrote 2 years ago, and you'll be appalled by how many mistakes are in it. Like, how did I miss these the first time? Well, it's like when you read it after a long enough time, it's kind of like reading somebody else's writing. So if you are somebody that is a creator, can't afford an editor, or doesn't have somebody who's willing to read through your work, if you have time, set it aside for a month or 2, and it will be improved. That's stinks. And I tell my students this. I'm like, if the papers due next Friday, really, you need to finish that first draft by like Tuesday or Wednesday, so you can set it aside for a few days and come back. You need to revise it before you submit it to me. And you can tell the ones that take that advice, and then the vast majority that don't. So it shows.
I said this in the chat, but a lot of times, if you're writing for the guild, or sometimes on drive-through, it's a little different with drive-through because that's more professional than community content. But sometimes you can find people who will work for either a skill swap, like I edit your thing, you edit my thing, or people who will work for a royalty share, or like if I edit your thing, you'll do art for my thing or something like that. So use the resources that are out there and collaborate.
Yeah, there are good communities of creators out there. The Drive-Thru RPG Discord channels got a ton of people there, DMs Guild creator channels, and a lot of people on those channels will do work trades. And I mean, there are some people that will work for royalties, though most professional editors, and if you're not like their friends or whatever, and if they're not interested in a work trade, want money per word or a flat rate or something, and that's reasonable. So, but that's also takes money, and we don't always have that laying around. So that's tough. Well, we can talk. So that was a little bit about Curse of the Mariner's Heart. I thought that was a wonderful introductory. Like our first session went really well. I think just we'll save favorite moments for later. I want to kind of end it with like a big stars and wishes sort of experience where we talk about what were our favorite moments from the season and what would we like to see in season 2. But so we'll come back to that. But so the next adventure we ran was one I wrote called Helping Hands, and that had Jessica's cat burglar subclass. And was Anthemina in that one? I don't think you played Anthemina in that one.
Let me see. Helping Hands was that one the first one where we ran into Fluffy with the frog?
Yes.
I think she was part of that one.
She was. All right.
Yeah, the only time I didn't play, she was, because that was the one where we ran into the where we were trying to boy, I'm blanking out here. But at the end we got a cabin, right?
No, that was from Every Winter Spring.
After?
Yeah, that was the next one. That was Connor's adventure. We inherited the cabin from the main NPC quest giver, whose name I'm blanking on. But yes, no. At the end of Helping Hands, you just kind of you returned to the village and saw all the different ways in which you had helped different people, getting paid back to the village that you had helped. Right? You got the orcs to send the wood.
Oh,
and
yes.
Halfling to send the community to send the food and all. Yeah, so that I thought I thought Anthemina was in that one too. So that also had the apothecary. Yes. So Jessica, I mean, I can talk about my adventure plenty if necessary, but tell us a little bit about this Tabaxi subclass smorgasbord you've provided us. So did you write all of those Tabaxi subclasses or just some of them?
All but 2.
Okay.
So the ones that I've played here, I've written.
Okay.
So it started with the Bardic College of Caterwauling. I love bards, and I live with very loud cats. And I didn't like how devoted to instruments bards are in D&D. I wanted to be a bard who could sing, and it made sense to me, if you're a Tabaxi bard, that you want to be a bard who can scream like a loud cat. So that was the first subclass I ever made. I haven't played it on here yet. I will season 2. But that was the first one. And then after that, the people that I worked with on it were like, this is cool. We should do this for like everything, for all of the classes. And it sold surprisingly well. So the next one, we started dividing them up. And I was like, well, cat burglar, that makes sense. There's already the thief archetype. But cat burglar is more dedicated to like appraisal and breaking and entering. Cat burglar always lands on their feet because they're a cat. And they have some other stuff that the cat burglar does thievery in a different way than the thief archetype. That was my big issue, was trying to differentiate it from the thief and still have that kind of cat thing going on. My favorite thing is the highest level skill you get in this, which is, how when cats hide, but really just their head is covered, but they think they're hidden. So in this, the cat burglar, as long as their face is covered, they can do a deception check to become invisible. So that is my favorite thing about this class.
I really enjoy the authentically cat-like features that all of those subclasses have. Like, that is great, but also I gotta call out the Path of the Stray Barbarian Smash ability. That if they break somebody else's things, they get the bonus on their critical hit range expands.
Yep.
And that's perfect, right? That's like, yep. That's one of the things that I sometimes worry about, because I myself create subclasses and classes too. I'm a mechanics-oriented sort of thinker sometimes. Is that I don't want to create a class, like you said, that kind of just repeats or is redundant or overlaps, right? And one of the challenges is making it stand out, unique. And feel like this isn't just reskinned assassin or something, right? And so introducing all those cat elements really makes it like, oh no, this really is a different thing, and it not only works, but it kind of has to be like a tabaxi thing, you know what I mean? So that's nice. It doesn't feel like I'm just checking boxes. One of those, because I have seen some products, and they're great. I'm not knocking anybody that like just is like, well, you know, I'm going to make a subclass for every class on this theme. I myself have done something like this, and to do it such that it's not just, well, I guess I got to make a paladin one. I don't know, you know, like half-ass it, but this doesn't feel that way at all. So that's really fun.
I can tell you, I have another one coming out next week.
So tell me, which one? So you've got the cat burglar, you've got the caterwauling, and you've got the stray. Are there more?
Yes.
How many more are out currently?
So there's one by Kat Evans, that's the Mouser, which is for the Ranger.
The Ranger.
And that is a Ranger who likes to play with their food. So they can do psychological damage to their quarry.
Oh, that's fine.
And then by David Markuski, who does all of the art, is the Warlock Spirit Cat. So that is a Warlock who's tied to, I think David drew on yokai. So there's like Bakaneko and Nekomata mythology in there. You have one of them as your patron. You can conjure one of them to accompany you, and eventually you can like switch bodies with it and wander around as that cat.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool.
So next week I'm releasing the Druid with the Circle of Catnip. And what you can do with that is you can heal when you're in the sunshine. You can use catnip to enhance your abilities and the abilities of your party, and more fun things like that with greatly expanded wild shape, as long as you are turning into something feline.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I think that's a place where there's room for development. Yeah, like NIF, yeah, that's very cool. I've thought about that too. So I look forward to seeing that, and maybe seeing it in play, season 2. So just briefly on Helping Hands. Helping Hands was an adventure I wrote with the Kickstarter I ran in February, which was the Ancestry and Culture, an alternative to race in 5th edition Kickstarter. Helping Hands and the other adventure I wrote for that Kickstarter, The Light of Unity, which I ran for the Thursday group, are both my attempts to write, you know, like hope punk sort of D&D adventure, you know, like super positive, kind of uplifting adventures where that kind of affirm values and meaningfulness that I, you know, sort of support. And they're also written with, you know, for all ages sort of style, so that I could run them for my kids and things like that, which I have done. So, you know, that's kind of what it is and what its purpose was, which is why you can do all of Helping Hands, even though there's 4 different, a minimum 4 encounters, upwards to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and with no combat, right? So you can do the whole thing through negotiation and social encounters if you want, or you can have like 3 combats. So that was important to me, to be able to create adventures that can allow that. So I'm glad you guys you were game for it, and explored that pretty well. I enjoyed that. So after that, we got to play Connor's adventure from Every Winter Spring. So Connor, tell me a little bit about what generated this adventure. Like where did it come from?
So what had happened was a call was placed out there in the Twitterverse for interested authors who might want to write for an online convention to submit 1-hour story mock-up write-ups. You had to do it anonymously, and they were sent in to a person. Their name is Noah Grand, and they're an incredible voice in our community. If you do not know them, I highly recommend following Noah on Twitter. It is at Noah Grand, Grand. Noah had put out this call, and the only request was that the story had to focus on the idea of rejuvenation or renewal. So had to be completely anonymous. You couldn't say who you were or identify yourself in the writing, but it had to be about renewal. What I did was I stopped and I just thought in my life about things that I had experienced, that family members had experienced, and tried to find a hopeful way to tell a story in D&D about that. And my mind kept going back to two of my grandmothers, who at the very end of their life were dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, and the impact that it had on their life. And I began thinking, what would rejuvenation, what would renewal look like in the life of somebody who toward end of life was looking at forgetting those key moments that for many of us make life worth living. So that's when I came up with that idea, but to turn it on the ear. I didn't want the Fountain of Youth to be a literal fountain of youth, because I don't think that that's often what people want. You know, I don't know if everybody necessarily wants to be young again, but they would like to remember the things that are important to them. So that was the key of the adventure. So I put that little twist in the end where the Fountain of Youth did not turn Calvin young. Instead, it gave him back his memories, and he was able to eventually, resolve those unresolved things in his life, and make peace in his life before he decided to depart for the Rainbow Bridge into whatever was next. So that's where it came from. Everything else, the little flourishes with hags and social interactions and heavy lore set in the Forgotten Realms, those are my passions. But the core element is a human story that a lot of people could probably empathize with.
Yeah, I really, that was a really wonderful adventure. I mean, in the spirit of what I talked about, really enjoying kind of more uplifting stories, it definitely hits. I mean, it was such a authentic and human story. It really was, more so than almost any D&D adventure I've read. So, I gotta say kudos to that.
Thank you. Getting back to what everybody was saying earlier, having an editor was key. It was essential to telling that story and telling it well. In that regard, Noah Grand was exceptional, and I have since worked with him on other projects. Worked with them on other projects, and it was that was my first forays into working collaboratively with other people and expanding out that way. And yes, if you can get an editor, anybody out there interested in writing, I highly recommend doing that. You will be a better writer for it. You will be better at what you do because they are good at what they do.
Yeah.
They're your bard. Take advantage.
Right? Yeah, be the bard. It's so yeah, what I know of them seems to be that they're a great member of the community, and it is, I mean, for those of you, I'm sure most of you have had your writing critiqued. Sometimes it's a little hard to get that editor's copy back, and you're like, wow, was it that bad? Like, look at all these things that are wrong here. Oh, but you gotta, they're trying to, it's something you're building together. That's good. That's a good thing that they found all of that, because that's all stuff that's getting fixed and being made stronger. So it's hard to tell yourself that. You gotta, if there are a lot of comments, if it's your baby, you look at it and you're like, okay, you step away for a little while, you come back and you're like, okay, I can do this. That's at least been my experience. So after From Every Winter Spring, we played A Day with the Fae, which was another of Jessica's adventures. And here, well, let me do one thing here. Yes, I have it's weird, this map, I want to ask real quick, From Every Winter Spring, did we say who made this map? I don't remember.
The map is actually, so if you are a creator on the DM's Guild, they make a number of assets from Wizards of the Coast available to you, as long as you give proper credit that we used resources available by Wizards of the Coast for creators on DM's Guild. So that particular map was one of the ones that was made publicly available.
Cool.
And I simply repurposed it for this particular adventure. So yeah, that's one of the things that, when we talk about art budgets and budgets just in general, we're worried about being able to afford editors, and artists absolutely deserve every penny that they earn. Good art is absolutely amazing and worth it. If you are worried about the budget for such things, if you're still very new and you don't have money set aside to be able to do this, because you're not going to get rich creating content, for role-playing games. It's something you do largely because of passion, and you might not have that money set aside. But if you don't have it set aside yet, there's a lot of assets that are available there for free for use on the guild. You need to find it, and for the love of everything, please don't use somebody else's stuff, without giving them appropriate credit, or taking something from somewhere and saying, well, I Googled it, so it's got to be free. Those folks, whoever did that, they deserve that credit and that support. But if you can't afford it, there are free ones. Just make sure you give proper credit to those who are making it free for you to use.
Wikimedia Commons is your best friend.
Yeah, Wikimedia Commons is great if you have even pretty basic Photoshop skills. Something like Unsplash or Pexels, Pexels, are they're commercially freely available photos, so you can take them and then manipulate them so that they look like paintings or something like this. I saw somebody post on Twitter the most devious thing. So there is an algorithm that produces freely usable photorealistic portraits of faces.
Oh, I saw this.
That are not of real people. They're like composites of like 1 million people. So
wait, what is it? Do you know the name of it?
I will. Yeah. So let's see if I can.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. So I can find this very quickly.
I think the problem was it primarily makes white people.
It is skewed towards. So they said their sample size is larger because it was originally like a university project and the university population was mostly European. So that is an issue. But when I used it to pump out results, it had a lot of people of color too, but it's back here somewhere.
Yeah, they were saying use that and then run it through one of those like Renaissance yourself filters. So take the composite person and then turn them into the like Renaissance painting version, and then you have art for your project.
Exactly, and it works. So the only issue is that it's just portraits like this, so you don't get like full body or anything, and they're not going to be wearing armor or anything. So that's the one drawback. Let's see here. I don't know how I would find this.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, that's
so I'll have to post it in the Discord later, and if I remember if anybody's watching at home, I'll try and post it in the YouTube. But the idea is, there's an AI face algorithm generator, and it says it's like, commercial, whatever, it's Creative Commons, freely available, and so is the oil painting outputs, and they're not of any real person, so you don't need anyone's permission, and so it's like endless supplies of portrait work. Now that's not going to help with your monsters or your scenes, but that's just like one way right there you can be creative. But Connor's right that you can also download. There's a package of images that Wizards of the Coast has made available for use on DM's Guild only. So that's where a lot of that stuff's coming from. Right. So A Day with the Fae. Let's go here. Speaking of art, we've got this. Isn't this Liz Gist's cover? Right. So
Yes.
Tell us about. I think I remember you saying something about the origin of this adventure. Could you remind me?
Yes. I wanted to create an adventure for basically it was for a Feywild anthology that I ended up not being a part of, and actually everyone involved in this anthology is not part of that anthology. Everyone involved in this adventure is also not part of it, and has released their own Feywild adventures as well. So David, Liz, and Kat, I don't think Ferrando has, who did the maps. But my idea for this was just, you're in the Feywild, because that was the premise of the whole thing. Instead of like a D&D take on the Feywild, I wanted to go back to the old, I mean, my family is like Irish and English way back to like the Fey folk who mess with you and aren't really like meaning harm, but are really inconvenient and play tricks on you, like Goblin Market, and to even American stuff like Rip Van Winkle. Like, you go and you eat some food and then you're asleep for 100 years, or you're stuck here forever, or, you know, something terrible happens to you and you might be at fault and you might not be at fault. So what would it be like to deal with a bunch of mess from Fey folk? And I wanted to, I thought it was kind of funny that I'd never seen the Fae hanging out with rust monsters, because, you know, they have that aversion to cold iron. And I was like, well, rust monsters would be perfect to keep them safe from that. And I know rust monsters usually in caves or in the Underdark, but like, why not have like a rust monster defense system? And also, wouldn't that be so funny to surprise your adventurers with, who might be expecting like, you need to groom our blink dogs or something, and instead it's a bunch of rust monsters who just want to be your friends.
Yeah.
And the idea for the concert, I mean, everybody in the concert hall is going to be immune to the charm because Fae are, but the players aren't. They might be resistant to it, but the Fae don't care. And that is drawing on years and years of ushering at concerts and moving pianos for piano competitions from back in my music school days. So that's where that came from.
Oh yeah, the concert was especially fun. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm glad that we got to see it, because had it been, I guess my understanding is, had you not decided to go run it by yourself or release it by yourself, it might still not be out.
Yeah, that anthology is not out yet.
So yeah, I haven't been in any gaming anthologies like that, but I did have an anthology, a professional anthology that I was submitted an article for, and it was like 7 or 8 years later it came out. I mean, you're like, what are you doing? Academics, you know, they're the worst.
Yeah, after a year, I was like, you know, it's okay. I'm just gonna go.
Yeah, I was in one that was about 6, maybe it was 6, but that's just too long of a wait. All right, so just yes, by the way, just to be clear, Gilbert found it. It's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. Is the one that generates the real photorealistic face, and then there's another one that turns it into a medieval oil painting that I don't have at my fingertips, but could find if I could stop having this roundtable and look through my like text messages from 3 weeks ago when I sent it to somebody. But it's out there, I swear. You should be able to find it. Anyway, okay, so that was A Day with the Fae, and I myself enjoyed the art as well. That was David. Is it David Marcuski did the Displacer Kitten?
I couldn't find my mute button. Yes, so Liz did the cover with the with Lord Oak and the baby rust monster,
yes.
And David did the layout with the Displacer Kitten, the Lord Oak on the inside.
Fantastic.
And, the Displacer Kitten.
Yeah, I like
the Displacer Kitten.
The kitten, I think, was very popular.
Yeah.
And then the last 2 sessions we played My Adventure. I'm trying to understand what that means. Oh, do I have a problem with the Zoom chat? No. That might be one of them. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. The Shape of Madness is a thing I ran for the past 2 sessions. That was My Adventure from that is not out yet. This was me featuring something that's going to be released in a couple weeks. It's ready to go, but I haven't. I mean, I've got. This is a weird problem to have, but I've just got a lot of other stuff happening and going on and coming out. So last week I put out an adventure, a collection of subclasses called Subclasses of the Plains, And I'm going to go ahead and show off my own cover art here for a minute. There's that. That's art by Bad Moon Art Studios, and then my partner Amy Marshall did the layout of the cover and it was just the figure is from Bad Moon, and then the background and all that is she put that together. So that's supposed to be the Ethereal Marauder, a subclass of the Rogue that can basically like step into the ethereal, border ethereal and out of it, kind of so like they Misty Step through the ethereal plane and get sneak attack and things like that through doing that. So that's her jumping out of the portal, I guess. That is came out on DM's Guild last week, and I was really surprised. It's been doing really well. I'm surprised a little bit, honestly, because it was featured in the DM's Guild weekly newsletter, which I didn't know was a thing that would happen. So that was very nice to see. But I've also got something coming out next week that's Theros related. The Mythic Adventures of Theros, or whatever it's called, is the new Wizards of the Coast book they're putting out on June 2nd digitally. It won't print, isn't going to be till July because of COVID-related printing delays. But that is, I have a question actually for all of you about this. So this is the cover image, the cover art, I should say. And that's supposed to be a half-orc, kind of Perseus-esque character who has claimed the head of a male Medusa. So I kind of reversed the gender on those. And that's line art by Bien Flores and painted over a work by Basith Ibrahim. And so that is I'm going to release on June 2nd. And I was planning on releasing it on DM's Guild just because that's where people go for Theros related content. However, it doesn't actually use any Wizards IP. It's Greek mythology related. So I could release it on drive-thru. Now, what do you think? Does anyone have an opinion on which would be better? There's no Wizards IP, so I can release it either platform. If I release it on DM's Guild, of course, Wizards takes 50% cut. Wizards and OBS takes 50% cut. And I can't put it anywhere else. If I put it on drive-thru, it's only a 30% cut. And I can put it on whatever, on my website, on Roll20, whatever I want. However, again, people are going to be looking for Theros stuff in DM's Guild in June. But who knows? Maybe next year, people will look for Greek mythology stuff more on drive-thru. What do you think? Does anyone have an opinion on this?
So there are a number of other Greek-type settings that have been released, not on DM's Guild. This was way before Theros. I'm looking at Arcadia, Odyssey, and so it's not a bad idea to maybe put it out on drive-thru RPG because it seems like there's a market for it, and it almost seems like it'd be a good idea to cross-pollinate. But at the same time, I just don't know what the difference of trying to sell anything on drive-thru RPG versus trying to sell something D&D related on DM's Guild. I mean, I hear that DM's Guild is a great market for that, so it's a real toss-up. I mean, I guess I haven't really helped you decide, but those are things to consider.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So as somebody who sells on both, I would say the best benefit of selling on DM's Guild is passive traffic. So if somebody is going to DM's Guild to get something Theros related, it'll show up as like people who bought Theros also bought, and your thing might show up. And that's when you'll get the sale. That is the benefit, and that's where, like, maybe not the first month, but several months down the road, and maybe years later, you will still be getting those sales. On drive-thru, you have to be more active with marketing yourself and saying, like, this is a Greek thing that I made. If you want Greek things, go buy this thing, because people aren't going to be looking for Theros-related stuff there. They might be looking for Eugene Marshall stuff there, but it won't show up in the same way that it would on DM's Guild. So since you can do it on drive-thru, you'll have greater control over it. Right now, there's also a push away from DM's Guild because of people who are angry that they haven't fired Mike Merles or addressed anything that's going on there. I know a lot of people aren't buying from DM's Guild anymore right now because they don't want to give any money to Wizards of the Coast. So, but I also know that that's like kind of a small group of people, and maybe people who are saying that wouldn't be buying from Wizards of the Coast anyway. A lot of people who are saying that might not even play D&D. So that's not totally helpful, but that's I would say you're weighing passive versus active traffic on that. Also releasing a Theros thing in June on DM's Guild. I'm guessing there's going to be like a ton of Theros related stuff in June. Like I know 2 off the top of my head.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That would be a third.
Right. But that would be a reason to not publish on DM's Guild, because it'll get lost in the flood of other Theros related content.
At the same time, it might be like, hey, look at all this cool Greek stuff.
Yeah, that's true. It could go either way.
Yeah, if you have an attractive looking product and you release it with a solid description and at a good price point, the releasing on DM's Guild at the time of the release of the book might be a good idea. What Jess is saying is 100% true. You're going to get more passive traffic in the DM's Guild. If you go to drive-through, you're going to have to actively market your stuff more. And fortunately, there are lots of wonderful and free ways creators out there who might be listening now or later can find to do that. But that requires a lot more legwork and a lot more time.
Yeah.
A question: do you think the releasing part, like right around that, goes for the hard copy too? Because I know I personally don't use D&D Beyond because I already have a bunch of like hard copies and I don't want to rebuy them. So now my main thing is like I just buy hard copies, and I really don't know what size of the population is like me on that. So like I know releasing something on June 2nd around that time would be great. But do you think the same thing would be true for the July 21st hard copy release date? I think it's like around the end of July that it's supposed to be released or something like that.
I know a lot of people who buy their hard copies from DM's Guild because they do pay print on demand there. Like Book of Seasons, which is right behind me. It's not a Wizards of the Coast product, but it is a DM's Guild product, and you can get that. It's a hard copy there. And I believe you can get other like D&D products in their hard copies on DM's Guild. Okay, Connor says yes. I believe that.
A lot of very old, out of print things.
Yeah.
You can go back and get a copy of. I really wanted to invest in the first D&D book I played. I'll say it was what was it called? The Rule Cyclopedia.
Rule Cyclopedia, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I started playing D&D. I'm like, I'd really like just to have a copy of that on the shelf for nostalgia reasons. You can get it through
DM's Guild's print on demand, right?
Through print on demand. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing. I'm exposed to a number of people at big gaming events and conventions. And you do find people who will only buy in book. If they will only buy in book, they're not probably going to buy your product anyway, because it's going to be available in PDF form through the guild, right? Or through drive-through. So they're not part of your target audience. There are plenty of folks who do buy books, but then supplement with the PDFs though. And that probably describes most of the people. I know some people only do electronic. But I know that the vast majority of folks want the physical book when physical books are available, but will supplement with high quality PDFs. And so that might be if you went in early, you could target those people who really want to get started with the Greek thing. They have D&D Beyond, but then a month and a half into it, when the physical book drops at the stores, those people are going to be going online. And if you've already generated traffic and gotten good reviews on your work, you're going to be poised to get a lot of those folks after they get their physical books.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, and I'm really a baby DM's Guild producer. I'm learning all of this. Everything I say about DM's Guild, I learned from just listening to other more experienced DM's Guild people talk. Is that the only reason to release like at the time when, right? The book drops is so you can get in like that new content ribbon, right? So that it'll be on the page when people load. But so much is going to come out that you'll be on that content ribbon for like an hour before you get pushed off the screen, right? So
Plus, a lot of people release like pay what you want stuff like
Yeah.
bam, 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 bam. So that new ribbon, you used to be able to stay on the new ribbon for a day or so. Now you might be on there for like 30 minutes.
Right. So yeah, I mean, so Vic, if you're thinking about releasing something that's maybe Theros related, but maybe it isn't ready, or you don't want to launch it on June 2nd. I mean, there might be a second bump in July. But I guess what Connor was suggesting is if you get it out even before then and get some sales or even a review, that's another boon, right? Because if you release on June 2nd, on July 20 something, you're going to be competing with a bunch of other products that all have been out, might have hit copper by now and have some reviews. So that is a challenge, right? That's like a trade-off. Technically, I could release my product now because it's not Theros specific. Mm-hmm. So that you can't release actual Theros content that names the proper nouns from the Theros setting, which, confession about which I know nothing, really, which is why I'm like, oh, it's mythology. I love Greek mythology. I'll write about, it's Perseus's sword and Aeolus's bag of winds and all this sort of stuff, right? Anyway, so that's something to think about. I don't know. I'm performing the same calculations, right? And I think a lot of us are when we release
Theros is a delightful book, and I think that a lot of folks are going to be very, very happy with it, because it does turn a lot of traditional D&D on its ear a little bit, in lieu of creating systems that are helpful for telling stories instead of resolving combats. So I can't at liberty discuss too much of that, but I'm incredibly excited for it. And have talked about it a lot outside of these chats. I've talked about it quite a bit with friends who are also similarly excited.
Do you have, NDA content aside, do you have any content that you're planning to release related to Theros?
I've spoken with people about releasing adventure arcs that are told in traditional Greek style, not traditional D&D style.
Oh, interesting.
What is that? Sorry. What does that look like? Like I like Greek mythology myself, but I think the last time I actually read an actual Greek tale was back in high school for AP English. I don't know what it looks like anymore.
Okay. So your traditional Greek tale starts with heroes or heroines that are exceptional in some way. Often their lives are foretold, or they have some sort of divine bloodline there, or something like that. And they are set apart early as being different. At that point, the gods turn them into their playthings, and they are sent on errands, hopeless missions. The gods meddle in romance and all the things in these people's lives, and so the gods become equal parts benefactor and antagonist in many of your traditional Greek tales, and sometimes switch roles depending on the story. At the very end, typically, your Greek tale is resolved in a retirement of sorts, where you have seen much of what the world has. You have survived the meddling of the gods, and at that point, often you turn your life toward family and home. Except in tragedies where it just ends horribly. But if you don't go the tragedy route, many of your Greek heroes retired, or they ascend to Mount Olympus in their own right. So that's what I'm looking at as far as telling a story that's in that vein, because it wouldn't feel like a traditional D&D story where typically the gods don't meddle with you too much, where often you see more tragedy in backstory instead of just something that just sort of sets you apart. So I'm kind of hopeful. And another wonderful thing about Greek myth is Greek myth accepted the power of the different. They elevated the power of the feminine in depending on the story in wonderful ways. So I'm kind of hopeful there. We could tell different stories, but but there's no reason why you couldn't tell a traditional D&D story there either. So no reason why you couldn't, if that's the way you wanted to go.
That's super interesting. Does anybody else have any Theros related or Greek mythology related content they're planning? I mean, Jess, do you have anything ish?
I kind of wanted to. I haven't started working on it because I had so I finally got I finally bought a copy of the Blood Hunter because I've been meaning to buy it for a while, and I bought it during the whole play it forward, like, it was like, oh, perfect time, I can buy it now and they can get more money. And I was like, man, this is really, because I liked the one-on-one specific class, and I was like, I kind of want to do something like that, and this looks really cool, the art's amazing. And I had an idea of like a paladin adventure with a return, but I don't know enough about them and how they like exist in Theros to have actually sat down and done anything besides like little bullet points. So I'm kind of thinking about like doing that, but outside of that, nothing like on my own personal time that I'm not collabing with other people with.
So that's cool. So I have just this one thing that I was like, oh, mythological magic items, I can come up with those. I will capitalize on Theros mania. So just real quick, so we've covered all of the adventures. I mean, I could talk about Shape of Madness ad nauseum, but I'll stop. I've talked about.
I love it.
It was amazing.
It does have Modrons, and that means I love it too. It was a lot. I do love the. Though I have warm feelings towards the kind of, I don't know, all ages, hope punky kind of uplifting tales of the Helping Hands kind of adventure. I think that my most favorite is, to use a kind of old fashioned term, the Funhouse Dungeon. So for me, if I had to pick one old school classic dungeon to play ever again, it would be White Plume Mountain. Which is, I love that adventure so much. It's so weird. It's so much bizarre stuff happens. Like, this place was set up by a wizard whose mind has been, fractured by contacting the furthest planes, or some whatever. That's the good stuff. Or even if you want to go with another form of kind of funhouse dungeon, like Expedition to Barrier Peaks or something, where you think you're going into this bizarre dungeon, but it ends up being, spoiler alert, a spaceship. That sort of thing. Yeah, if you didn't know, that's that's the first time science fiction was introduced into D&D. I mean, we're talking this 1970s, so I mean, I hope it's okay to spoil now, 40 years later. But.
Excuse me, I've never read that. How dare you?
Yeah. I will say, just on a side note, we are talking about that DM's Guild does POD, print on demand, for the old stuff. If you are really a nostalgic fan, and since I started playing D&D in 1983, maybe, with the Menser cover of the Red Box basic set, the Menser edition with the Larry Elmore art on the cover. That was my thing that started with. And I played, some of those old adventures. So I'm of a certain age that I get suckered into buying 80s nostalgia crap. And so the Goodman Games has put out several of the old school adventures, like they announced Temple of Elemental Evil recently. They've got, like Keep on the Borderlands, Expedition to Barrier Peaks, and it's this hardback that has the original adventure as written and then a 5th edition version in it. So it's got both. And there's like a little essay, like about, sometimes written by the original creators and stuff. Ooh. So it's really cool, at least to flip through at the bookstore if you get a chance, whenever we are able to go out in public again. I'd recommend it. But so, all right, we've talked a lot about all of that. I would like to hear from since we didn't get to feature anything of Gilbert's, because this was all a bunch of D&D content, and you're primarily not a D&D producer. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about something you might be working on or have plans to work on. I'd love to hear it.
I actually have 2 games releasing this summer, and that's the plan, at least. Depends. Well, the first one is This Night and Then. We're in the process of getting the art back, and we're trying to do the layout and trying to put it out. It's just going a little slow. My artist is in Brazil right now, and if you look into it, what Brazil's going through right now, it's pretty bad. But This Night and Then was inspired. Initially, it was going to be a hack of a 10 Channels game, and then Isolation sort of like made me rethink everything over. It's a game based off of like those really great finales of things, the great movie endings where there's a history for all the characters, and it's the idea that you start in the present, which is like this is the final night. No matter what happens, everything's going to change after this, and it's the finale. And then you sort of scroll back through all of the different memories, going through each of the characters' sort of lives and relationships, and we'll have like about 20 modules for people to play with in this game. So you can recreate like your favorite TV show endings, like The Office or things like that. We're trying to make it so that it's very universal to play very funny games or very serious games. And we even created a whole like, well, what if you're like the Dungeons and Dragons type of thing, where you created like where you're about to face the final boss, and then we just flip back and go see how you all started on this weirdly old school adventure. It doesn't have to be. There's no combat. It's no GM. It is a collaborative game using tokens to sort of push narratives. And that's the game that I'm releasing next. And before the summer, a friend and I have been working on an online LARP because there's been talk about, hey, we need to do LARPs online. And so there's a show, old episode, from the 90s incarnation of the Twilight Zone. There was an episode called Dead Man Switch, in which aliens are coming to the planet and a bunch of people are trapped inside of like bunkers underground, and they have to type in a code every once in a while to stop the nuclear bombs from just going off. So like they're sort of like the last chance. If humanity can't fight the aliens, they have to. So a friend and I are collaborating on it. He's writing a Discord bot that's supposed to be able to do the functionality of the full game. So no GM. So you have to type in passwords constantly throughout the game to keep the world from exploding. And there's a number of characters from different countries, and each one of them have different relationships. And the idea behind it is you have 12 months of the game. So there's going to be random events generated throughout the 12 months. And then you have to make decisions as players whether or not you want to keep going. As long as one person types in the code, the world doesn't end. But you're sort of gambling that the aliens didn't win. So, and you never really know. Maybe you do know. We haven't decided whether or not we give a closed ending. But the idea behind it is that we want them to have multiple endings. So it can either go bad or go great or go terrible. But I've written about, I think, 60 events for it, and I still have like another 30 or 40 to go.
Wow. I have so many questions, but I want to let other people talk first.
It sounds a little bit like, have you played Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes?
No, I have not.
It's a board game that has like a video game component, and you are trying to decode a bomb defusal with a partner. And if you, like, by explaining abstract shapes and sometimes colors to each other. And I cannot play it because it gives me panic attacks, but I can't even be in the room when it's played, actually, because I've had panic attacks. But my partner loves it, and a lot of my friends love it. But it made me think of that.
I was gonna say, yeah, that the second game could be super intense. It also immediately made me think of, like, I don't know if this is weird academic me showing here, but it's something called the prisoner's dilemma, where like you're making decisions not knowing what the other person's necessarily going to decide. And so there's this, you can imagine it being like a kind of chicken where you're like, well, they said who's going to be the one? It's a collective action problem. Like somebody has to enter the code. Who's going to do it? Right. I could imagine that having all kinds of repercussions for the way the game plays out. That's super, super interesting.
We also included a component where every once in a while there is a player will get locked out of the system because they're going through a system like retooling. So like for a period of time, that person can't enter the code, and so has to rely on all the other people to enter the code. And it can get really, like, every character has written, like, we even wrote like full backstories for the LARP for all the characters. And so like you could end up playing a character that has really no hope in whatsoever. So it's like you're hoping that the person is going to find hope in the middle of all of this.
It could be intense.
I would cry. I would cry during this game.
And then the first game, that sounds to me like that scene sometimes you get in, it's often used for comedic effect in sitcoms, but it doesn't have to be. It's often also shows up in like in very suspenseful action films where the first scene of the movie or the episode is the climax. And then in a comedy, it's like record scratch, you might wonder how I got myself here, that sort of story, right? And then they go back in time, or like there's about to be this big climactic event, and then it's like 3 days earlier, and you're like, then you have to figure out how they got into that mess, right? I mean, is that the kind of idea, like you start with, you're right at the big moment, and then you tell the narrative, you have a narrative engine that kind of
in essence, yes. The first 3 modules I wrote were based off of Rent and St. Elmo's Fire, and the idea behind it is like there is a definitive ending. Like we write it in this is going to be the end of this scenario, and when we get there, that's the end of the game. Like St. Elmo's Fire is the place burns down to the ground. Rent is really like when Angel dies, and it's like this idea is that like how do we get to this point and all the relationships that builds up to that point, and the fun part about it is when you're at the end, you're the completed character. You've gone through the arcs, you've gone through everything you need to go through, but then you can go back and be like your incomplete version and play your incomplete version as you learn how to grow into the person you want to become someday. And it's the idea behind that. Like I love the idea of really good finales that reward the sense of like history and all of the things that we've been through as characters and players.
That's super interesting. If you get a chance and if you're in a mood, there was a session we ran for the Thursday group that was Linda Codega's game called Star Drawn, and it is tarot is the mechanic. So like you play tarot cards and interpret them. You don't have to know about the cards necessarily, but you can like consult a tarot guide. But it's a very narrative heavy game with it's focusing on people. It reminds me of that, but it's the flip side of it. So you start with the fact that there had just been a war, and then you're telling stories, flashback stories about how you got to the end of the war. Like how did the end of the war occur? You know what I mean? But you're telling it at some sort of after celebration, right? So you're kind of like reminiscing about this war after the war has ended. And it reminds me a little bit of that. And I think, so if you're interested in like, cause that's what the only game we've run across the 3 groups that was like entirely non-traditional game, right? Every other session has been, either D&D or, the Tuesday group ran Cypher System and Savage Worlds. And then we ran one other system on Thursday called Fundamental RPG, which was another kind of D20 style indie game, but it was very, in the model of Cypher or D&D, but Star Drawn was definitely different. So
I'll definitely check it out. I mean, I've tried to watch a couple of the other previous episodes from the other groups, so I just it's hard for me to sit down for longer than an hour. Yeah,
I know. Star Drawn goes about 2.5, 3. It's it's a fairly sizable chunk, but maybe you might want to at least check it out because it's a neat mechanism too. And Linda, they're pretty great, so that's fun.
I need to watch that to see how you did it, because I wrote a game that uses tarot cards as a mechanic too, but I haven't figured out how to translate it well to online play other than saying like either everybody like get your tarot deck, which not everybody has one, or everybody use a card draw thing, which is also kind of difficult.
Yeah,
how you did it.
You can upload decks of cards to a Roll20. I don't have one here. Actually,
cool.
So actually, you know what? I'm going to, for those watching at home, you'll see if you are a Roll20 Pro subscriber. I didn't mean to turn this into a Roll20 commercial, but you can upload. You can not only upload decks, but you can transfer one thing from one game to another. And so if you look, you might be able to see it now. Let me see. Can everybody see that? Down here at the bottom right corner of the table, that's a tarot deck. So you can either use one of the options, but the easiest way is to grab the card off the top, drag it, and drop it under the screen. So I don't know if that showed up for everybody, and then you can move that around like a token. So you could do it, just a quick draw, right? You could do a 3-card draw and move them around in whatever layout you want. So if that's all you need is a space to be able to draw cards, you can do that.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. Thank you. Now I can play Necromancy online.
So
another cat game.
Oh, Necromancy. I get it. I hear it. All right. So I don't know. I'd love to hear a little bit about how maybe I've heard a little bit about what Gilbert's working on for sure, and I want to hear. Are those going to be released on? Getting a little bit of feedback. Maybe that's from John or Connor. I'm not sure. All right. Are you going to be releasing those on Itch on your Itch page?
The plan is to release it on Itch and drive through at some point. I joined up forces with a friend because I want to focus just on game design, and I don't want to try to have to build up a Twitter and all the other things that have to go along with game stuff. So I'm like, here, you take care of all of this, and then I'll just write 1 million games. And that's allowed me to start actually getting into the writing aspect of it. So we're going to be under the unnamed game company moving forward. We've just got our logos and our designs and everything. And, yeah, that's going to be a lot nicer. So I can start actually developing board games and RPGs and everything too.
I would love to hear from everybody, because this is something that I definitely struggle with is, when you're an independent creator, you make a thing and maybe, you love it a little bit too much, and then you put it out on the internet or on drive-through or whatever, and without doing all that legwork of promoting, you just get crickets a lot of the times, and it just disappears. And that's kind of a little soul-crushing, right? At least for me. I'm a big marshmallow, apparently. But I'd had to this year for the first time, I switched from just writing something for my friend Aaron and his company, which I did for a year or so or two before that, and just handing it to him and being like, great, I can't wait to see what you do with it. Bye. To like, all right, I'm going to be a person in public. And, I don't hate it as much as I thought I would, actually. But I'd love to hear how any of you are approaching that. I know one great answer is Gilbert's, which is collaborate with somebody who can do that. But does anybody have any other approaches? How do you guys approach that?
It's been a real hard time for me trying to self-promote. And even though I write for like collaborative groups or, publishers or whatever, it feels like I'm out there on my own, just kind of trying to say, hey, here's my thing, please buy it. Right. And it probably took the better part of 2 years before I felt comfortable being very proactive, being very aggressive, which you kind of have to be in just the right way. Because there are venues where if you're aggressive, they're like, no, that's advertising. We don't want none of that. And so it's a balancing act, trying to figure that out. And I think I'm getting better every day. So I don't think it ever stops. I don't think you ever stop learning how to self-promote. You don't ever stop learning how to do it better and do it more effectively.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other techniques?
Well, one, I whenever I think about like self-promoting, I always get so like frustrated with myself, because I have a part of my academic background is public relations, and we have to take a bunch of advertising courses inside of that. And I'm just like, why have I not been using this degree that I went to college for properly? I obviously didn't pay attention well enough, but I want to shout out the RPG workshop. They have a lesson on there about marketing that I have not gone all the way through yet, but is on my to-do list of like every day. I feel like I've got part of my life together. I have a list of things I got to get done through the day, and one of them is going through the RPG workshops marketing thing. So I've been working on that. And when I first did Restless, I was posting on the Facebook group every the D&D 5e1 every week at a certain time. Like I heard somebody say, oh yeah, the best time to do it is such and such. I was like, oh, okay. So I guess I'll just get up at like ass crack of dawn to have it posted so that the mods will see it and then let me post it. So I was doing that. And then I sent it to a bunch of people to review. And it's doing all right. It's making some money, but I definitely think from what I've seen from the marketing class that it'll definitely help a lot more than what I've been doing.
Yeah, I want to second Ashley Warren's RPG Writers Workshop, because that's been, I actually signed, I did it too. I did the Marketing 101, and it's worth it. I mean, it's like $20 or something. It's not
I'm in
super.
that class too.
Yeah, there's so many good resources in it about like how to do all of that, like how to, like, she pointed me to one of these apps that you do that, like, she recommended Buffer. I ended up going with Hootsuite, but these are these things where I just sit down once a week and I write like 20 promotional tweets and Facebook posts and schedule them. And so I spend like a couple hours one day a week doing that. And then I don't have to think about it anymore. Because what was happening is I would be like, oh, I need to do that. And I'd forget. Or I'd remember. And then you can't post 3 tweets in a row. That's going to be ineffective, right? Because you hit it's all or nothing on that. And the thing that's been blown me away the most is people saying, like, confirming with data actually, that when I thought I was promoting too much, that still wasn't enough. Because that's the thing that turned me off. I was like, I don't want to be pushy and like spam people with my stuff. They know what I'm, what, right? But the way these algorithms work and the way something like Twitter works, unless you're like a real dedicated Twitter person, you're not going to literally see every tweet from your followers or from the people you're following. So I saw, like, Adam Hancock was talking about this. He's somebody that promotes a lot of his DMs Guild stuff pretty aggressively. And he was talking about how he was tweeting 3 times a day for a week about his new title. And it was like 6 days in that one of his followers was like, I've been waiting for you to announce this, and he's thinking, how did you miss it? I've been like grossing myself out with how much I'm promoting this. So I guess, yeah, that's hard. It makes me uncomfortable. But did you have something, Jess, you were going to say?
Yeah. Actually, I kind of had that experience too when Book of Seasons came out, because I felt like I was being gross about promoting it. Not just because it was for me. It was the first project I'd ever produced. So Book of Seasons, Solstices and Equinoxes, both volumes, had just under 50 creators involved.
Wow.
Between writers, artists, and editors and layout. And, it's a baby project for my first production.
Yeah, really.
To do. And so I really wanted it to do well because I wanted all of them to succeed. So I was talking to like a bunch of review sites like Geek Tyrant, comicbook.com, all of those people, and they all were really responsive and they all like promoted it. And then still, when after me being like, hey, buy Book of Seasons, like 4 or 5 times a day on Twitter, weeks later, people were like, so when is Seasons coming out? And I was like, are you kidding? So yeah. And also, you don't know what's going to sell. Like, I had stuff with that, depending on what the market is or what people want. Or timing is like, Equinoxes came out the week that a lot of places shut down and nobody was buying. And I felt so bad for all my creators. Luckily, we've like made copper now and I feel better for all of them about that. But I felt so bad because we did a whole thing. We wanted it to come out on the spring equinox.
Right.
Haha. But then COVID happened. And like, as the producer, I know it's not totally on me, but I felt like I had failed that.
You're not responsible for COVID? Okay.
No, and I'm not responsible for, it not being an instant bestseller.
Yeah.
But like, I can yell about that till the end of time. And if, people are scared that they aren't going to have enough money to buy rent, to make the rent, to buy food, they're not going to buy it. Whereas like a month later, when I made Dumpster Fire and just said, hey, look at this piece of garbage that I made for Trash Jam. I think that was literally the tweet. People were like, I want that. I had absurd itch sales for me saying, look at a piece of garbage that I made. So like, I don't know.
Wow. Yeah, I gotta say, that's the thing I've had to make peace with the most is the lack of control over how things are received. And like, I mean, I did a Kickstarter of my own in February, and I'd been on 2 Kickstarters with Sigil before, and there's another one we're doing start next week, actually on Tuesday. They're launching a new one. And this is just, you look at Kickstarter and it's like all of the vagaries of DM's Guild and Drive-Thru times 10, because good products will really struggle to meet that goal. And then products that I really kind of make some side eye at, you're like, why is this making $100,000? This is garbage. You know, it's nothing that any creator puts out into the world is truly garbage. I don't want to say that, but it's garbage. You know what I mean? Anyway, so that's a struggle I have. I will say that the one thing that I've found that works for me is this right here. And what I mean by that is I find that I'm comfortable promoting my stuff when it's in a context of us promoting each other's stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's when I'm okay talking about, like, I want to share this super cool thing with you that I made, but I want to see you share that super cool thing that you made with me. Like, if it's mutual support, it feels sincere, because it's people kind of like getting enthusiastic and geeking out about their thing. And you know how it is. If you probably many of us have family or friends that aren't quite as invested in the role-playing game space as we are. And so when you have a conversation with them, then you do feel, at least I might feel a little pushy or a little like monopolizing the conversation if I talk as much as I would want about my latest product, you know. But when you're with other creators, they get it and you get them, and so it's cool to do that. So that's how I've found a way to do it, is I just find communities where people want to hear about it and I want to hear what they have, and that makes me feel like it's okay. It feels authentic and sincere then to be like, look at this cool thing I made, as opposed to like hard sells on the sidewalk kind of thing, which is sometimes what it feels like when you're out on social media. Just like stopping random strangers and being like, D&D, 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 anyone? D&D? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of what brought me to want to do this stream a little bit, right? Is like, let's get people together and support each other publicly so that we can get that boost, because it's fun. And that's the only way I could bring myself to put my own stuff out more visibly, you know? Anyway, so here's where we're at. We've been talking for an hour and a half or so. I did have more questions to ask. I wanted to know a little bit about how people's creative process worked. You know, like, I'd like to hear, like me, for example, very often I start with either, I'm kind of, maybe this is unusual, I start with either a feeling or an image, and then I build the narrative out from there. The core inner narrative of the story or of the subclass, and then last I look at things like lore and world building and all of that. So like a lot of people I know, when they get into creating, especially for like a fantasy game, they like the first thing they do is they sit down and they're like, okay, who are the gods? How is this world created? And they start with this like giant world book. And then at the end, they're like, oh, right, there's people in it, and you're going to be in it too. So let's make a space for the adventurers. And I'm like the reverse. I'm inside out. You know what I mean? But I'd like to hear about everyone else's creative process a little bit, and not just how it applies to D&D, but some of these other systems too. And then I wanted to do stars and wishes, so to speak, for the season, hear people's favorite moments. But should we take a quick like water bio break, or do you think, I mean, how are we doing?
Let's take a break, I think.
Yeah, break sounds good.
And then we can come
Break
back
sounds
for
good.
another 45 minutes and then or something, and then that'll be a good day. All right. So everybody, we're going to go take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will talk a little bit about our creative processes and our highlights from season 1 of Saturday's Sigil Spotlight. Thanks. All right, and we're back. This is Sigil Spotlight. I am Eugene Marshall, and we are having our Saturday season finale, the end of season 1 for the Saturday group. We have a game on Tuesday because we're 1 week behind on Tuesday. And then Thursday we'll have our season finale then as well, on the 1 week from Saturday, this coming Thursday. I don't know what date that is. I forget. Dates and times mean nothing to me anymore. This is Sigil Spotlight. We're a diverse community of tabletop industry creators spotlighting each other's work. And today we've been talking about we reviewed the season, the episodes we've played, and kind of talked a little bit about how those things came to be from each of our creators. We talked a little bit about what we're working on now. I want to hear a little bit more about that, as well as people's creative processes. We're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to kind of wrap up with our favorite moments from season 1. Tell me a little bit about who would like to start. I'll go and I guess I'll just follow the overlay top down. So that means Ismael, you're first. Ish, tell me. So do you have a creative process that's particular? And if so, what are you working on with it now? You're muted.
You're muted, love. No, on Zoom.
There you go.
See, try to be careful. You end up being overly cautious. Anyhow, in running games, like in writing, I tend to rely on like an actual, you can't see it that well, but actual written, like on paper kind of ideas. And what I tend to do is like just write out. Either I will do like kind of stream of thought stuff and try and go back later and try and figure it out, or I'll do outlines, or even like those bubble outlines and just kind of do stuff like that. But usually I'll do that until I have a pretty solid idea of what I want to do. And then I'll kind of transfer like either the outline or some kind of a rough kind of blueprint for what I want to do onto some kind of digital document. And then I'll just start writing it out from there. And usually by the time I've got it digital, I'll have like either files for each of the chapters or segments that I want, or I'll chunk it out somehow in that kind of way, because I find I tend to work better just like having chunks of things. That way I might get tired of one thing and be like, okay, I've put enough work into that for right now. Let me move on to this other thing. And it helps really to do it that way. I learned that because when I had one giant document that I was just going back and forth on, it was almost like running a marathon, on a keyboard, and it was not fun, just trying to like figure out where my creative energies were taking me. So having those chunks is usually a really good idea for me to just like having those categories of things where I can like throw my energy at in a way that's going to help me not burn out on any one or the whole project, because that's also a big that's a thing to avoid on my end.
So when you go to so I get the notebook idea, right? It's kind of just a collection of notes and outlines. And then when you transfer it to the digital, what tools do you use? Do you use like a Word or some sort of Google Doc or some sort of like just a word processor and then enter in files?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Have you ever used something like Scrivener or one of these that's kind of, because that sounds a lot like your method reminds me of the way, like I tried to use Scrivener and it kept wanting me to do what you are describing, which is not my particular process. Like there's all of these like, it's almost like a digital corkboard where you can like pin notes and then move them around, right? So you can be like, I want this section here and that section here. But I never, ever, ever hardly do that with my own writing. I'm very, very linear. So I just like sit down and write it from front to beginning, back, like beginning to end and then it's like outline form. And then I go through and I fill in the outline. And then I go through and revise the filled in outline. And I just go through it over and over again in order, which is probably terrible, but I mean, I don't know. That's how it works for me. So I was like, I just only ever used the Word document format in Scrivener. I didn't use all these cool like hyperlinking tools and wikis it builds for me, and I'm like, it's just some text on a paper. So anyway.
I had no idea it did that. I might have to look into that. Yeah. Of course, I would still do the handwriting part because that seems to really get my creative brain going.
Have any of you used tools like that? Do any of you use digital tools that you find helps your creative process or workflow?
I've never used Scrivener for like D&D projects, but I have a book turned graphic novel, probably going back to a book that I've been working on for like years. I'm embarrassed at it. And I consistently use Scrivener for like writing that and like piecing things together, because I'll have a scene that's supposed to be like 20 chapters in, and I'm like, I should put that somewhere for later, and then it lets me just shift things around
Yeah, I mean, I've been told that people who write novels really, really like it's a tool that's built for people like that, because it's like chapter based, and anyway. which I don't do that. I don't write, when I write long form, it's academic writing, and it's a very different beast. You don't get to just swap chapters around. It wouldn't work. Yes. So, all right. Well, that's pretty cool. So, I mean, Vic, do you have, like, what's your creative process like? So I'm imagining that you've told us a little bit about what it looks like when you're making your novel / sometime graphic novel, but what about when you're doing game work?
Oh, well, I guess my creative process starts off with bouncing, like, it's verbal. I really like to have people that I can, like, bounce off ideas with, and I use my Saturday D&D group as, like, guinea pigs. Like, when I was working on Restless, like, they were very instrumental in helping me, like, work through, like, my questions, like, hey, does this make sense? Like, there's a mechanic in there called Meat Shield, where you can jump in front of some, like, if you're within 5 feet, you can jump in front of somebody and take that damage instead, or like half of it or all of it, depending on how well you roll. And they were really like, I was like, I don't know how I'm doing this. How far should it be? Like, this sounds like a good idea. What do y'all think? So first it's very verbal, like, hey, what is this? How does this concept sound to you? And then I get very scattered after that. Like, stuff gets written, I'll have things in like a notebook. Like, I have a blue notebook that had all the stat blocks I originally wrote for the for Restless. And so I'll start with that, and then sometimes I'll have like little chunks of notes for like little notes app that you get on your laptop, and then I'll also have like a Google Doc somewhere, and like I'll just be adding bits and chunks to different parts, and then eventually come to a point where I'm like, oh, okay, let me put this all together in this Google Doc and then transfer it over to whatever I'm using to like create the document, whether it's InDesign, GM Binder, Homebrewery, or recently I bought the Word, like that it was, I can't remember what it's called. It was out in the DMs Guild. It was how to like do layouts in a Word, like a template
that
for,
Laura
Hirschburner's
Hirschburner's thing.
Yeah.
Great.
That is super good template. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So something like that. But yeah, I'm very, like, it starts off very focused with other people, and then it gets very scattered.
Yeah.
It comes back in.
Yeah, we should, like, just in case any of you are interested, or anybody watching currently or later on YouTube, like, so just to recap here, Scrivener, it's a paid tool. It's kind of, I think it's like $40 or something. So,
but it's a one-time tool, so it's not like you're subscribing to it.
Not like the Adobe Creative Suite, for example. Woof. Yeah, I have it, but InDesign is super powerful, but man, you got to pay, and it is a learning curve too, for sure. I can barely use it. My partner Amy is the layout person, so she's did the layout on my up DMs Guild titles, and so she's the bomb on that, not me. But we also, you mentioned, so Google Docs, sure, notes, physical notebooks, and then when you're doing actual layout, you GM Binder or Homebrewery as well. Homebrewery will produce like stat block since formats, and then GM Binder will lay it out so it looks a little bit like a D&D sort of product.
I use the Homebrewery and the GM Binder use pretty much the same code. So like if you take the stat blocks from Homebrewery, which I had them generated so I wouldn't have to constantly like do all the formatting, and then I copy and paste them into like a little document, a Google Doc first, just in case something went wrong, and then I put it over to GM Binder, and it just have a couple like formatting things to change, and it was so much easier.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go. For those of you who want to create DMs Guild content, you download the folder from DMs Guild. It's free, of art provided by Wizards of the Coast. I mean, there's a few hundred images in there from earlier editions, mostly 3rd edition content. I think
there's 26 different downloadable folders of art.
Yeah, there's a lot, and each of them has a few dozen images in them, right? So there's hundreds of images. You then, you then write it in like a Word document or something, and then you load it into GM's Binder and use the stat blocks from Homebrewery, and voila, you've got a title you can publish on DM's Guild. Although, as we mentioned, if you can swing it, get your friends to edit it, because Homebrewery and GM's Binder do not correct your typos and errors and mistakes. And if, for me, I am such a visual person when it comes to the D&D. I mean, not maybe in all ways, but when it comes to my fantasy gaming or just gaming in general, I like to have an image that kind of evokes a character or a mood or a setting. And so I am, because I'm fortunate, privileged enough, really, to be able to have a day job that allows me to do game writing on the side. I don't have to rely on it for my livelihood like some people do. So for me, the profits I bring in, I'm like wrapping back into future projects on art, mostly, because that's the biggest expense. Because you can get people to do there are shortcuts on layout, but professional layout people are so much better, and there are shortcuts on editing, but professional editors are so much better, and there are shortcuts on art. You can use stock art, but sometimes your idea, there's just no piece of stock art that just really captures it. Mm-hmm. And so I will say, one of my all-time favorite things about being a game creator now is coming up with an idea, putting it into words, and then seeing an artist like a pro visualize it, realize it for me. It's like Christmas every time an artist sends me the thing. You're like, oh. I mean, like, can I just gush about my artists right now? I mean, like, look at that Modron image. I love that so much, right? That's Bad Moon Art Studios. This piece I just got this yesterday. So I'll tell you a little secret. So if you don't know, probably many of you do, when you do an art order with an artist who works regularly in the game industry, you often provide what are called reference images, right? Mm-hmm. So you're like, well, I want, maybe this pose, but like the clothing should look like that and their face should look like that. And, these sorts of things. And the artist can put it together with it in, a text description as well and whatnot. And you specify just a figure or line art or a scene or a quarter page or any size and things like that. So, this is the exact pose from the still image from Clash of the Titans, the original 1980s one, when Perseus is holding up the Medusa head. But it's the armor style from Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
I thought I recognized it.
But
so familiar.
I was like, I want something that looks like Clash of the Titans, but I want it to look like D&D, not human. So it's a half-orc woman. And B, I wanted to reverse the genders, because there's always this, and I'm sure for those of you who are familiar with the Uncaged stuff, there is this weirdly unpleasant gender violence element to the Medusa story, right? It's about a man coming in and killing a threatening, powerful woman. So I wanted to at least not play into that trope, and I like the idea of reversing it. So, because there's also that, I think Ashley Warren even said the piece of art that inspired her to start reverse. There's a statue by an Italian sculptor, isn't it?
It's Medusa holding the head of Perseus.
Yeah, which is super amazing. If you haven't seen it, you need to Google that, like, post haste, because it's awesome. So that's me. Like, I'm the kind of person who, if I see something like visually, I'm like, a story appears, and that's where my stories come from, right? Like, when I'm making a character, I might have, okay, whatever, they've released a new class. I'm like, I'd like to try an artificer. They released an artificer class, but doesn't do it for me. What does it for me is typing artificer into Google Images, and then seeing one that's like, oh, I want to be that person. That's what does it for me. And then the story comes after that. Anyway, so that's like, I want to be that person on that cover of that half-orc woman. Because a separate conversation we could have at some point is, why we choose the characters we choose to play. Like, I've discovered a little bit more over the past 5 or 10 years of D&D, a little bit more about myself and my identity through realizing the fact that I usually want to play women characters, for example, right? So, I mean, that's a thing. But it's usually that's what happens. It's this visual. I'm like, I want to be that person, right? So that's what happens for me with my creative process. What about, I'd like to hear a little bit more about anybody else's. I mean, Gilbert, Jonathan, we've heard a little bit about Gilbert. You mentioned this right before we went live about your creative process. I don't know if you want to share that, or if there is another story about your creative process.
I was just joking. That's not how If that was really how I created games, that would be a lot of fun. But no, most of I approach my writing the same way I approached when I was in Poetry Slam. It's the same way I approach it. I come with a really cool idea, I put a placeholder document, and then I don't write in it, and then if I really like the idea, I'll write in my head everything about it until my brain can't fit anything else about it, and then I'll start writing. So like I'll internalize, like I'll keep like, I don't know, maybe 6 pages in my brain, and then like finally like put it on paper, which is terrible if I forget to do that, because then I lose everything. But yeah, my process is I internalize everything, I hold it in my brain, and then re-edit everything in my head as I go through it, and then people think I'm not actually working on it, and then suddenly I'll like, oh, I'm done.
Wow.
How long have you been working on it? 6 months. I'm like, you've only started writing like 5 times. I'm like, well, that's how I write. So it's how I wrote poetry. It's how I did everything. So I just kind of like piece it in my head. I think
Wow.
it's a weird strategy, but my frenetic brain doesn't function any other way. Like I don't want to put it on paper because then I don't like to edit it. I like to write it, and then when it's like, so it's edited in my brain before it gets on paper, and then it's finished.
I am simultaneously in awe and like jealous because you have a bigger brain than I do, because I can't hold stuff in there like that. Like I have to outsource everything onto my device or a database or something. I can't. I literally I'll be like, oh yeah, you that thing where you're like, you remember that you need to do something later. If I don't put it in my phone or my to-do list, it's gone. I never do it ever. So I just the extended mind is out in the world there taking care of me. Same thing with my creative process. I like am that person that's like falling asleep and then jumps up and has to like write a note, because otherwise I'll forget it, and then I'll be the next day I'll be like, what was that awesome idea I had last night? Damn it. So that's props to you for doing that. I can't. And I also am jealous because revision is the most painful process for me of writing.
It's a weird thing in my brain. I don't understand how I function it, and I also, but I don't, I have this like I have this weird artist feel that is like, I don't want anything coming out into the world unless I fully fall in love with it. So like from my viewpoint of my, like the way I view my artist, like as an artist has always been, which is the moment I put it on paper, it's real. And if it's real, then it's no longer, it's tangible, and it's something that like can be judged. And I don't like to put something out until I feel like, oh yes, that is something I fully vestedly in love with. So like I've like got 7 or 8 revisions in my brain of something, but that's only because like I don't want to put it on paper because I don't think it's perfect.
Wow.
And it's weird OCDs and things like that make, so my brain is clogged with things.
No, I've heard people talking about like, I've got it all in my head, but I haven't figured out how to. I'm like, how? I can't remember my phone number. What do you? So what about Connor, Jess? We haven't heard from you about your creative processes yet.
For me, it depends on what I'm writing. So, like, I can give you an example. For Solstices, that was an adventure. I knew I was writing a winter-themed adventure about the winter solstices, so I looked up a lot of winter-themed monsters. I should have started. I always start with the monsters because I love the monsters, and I love monster stats. And from that, I get the idea from, so like how you start with a mood, I start with the critters. So I looked up a ton of just folklore, like winter folklore from around the world. And as I was reading the things, I thought like, hey, what if there's a really diverse town that over time stops believing in their tradition, stops respecting them, and all of the winter creatures are like, hey, pay attention to us, and all decide to attack at once. So that's what happens in my adventure in that. So as I was reading these tales, I started thinking like, oh, Frau Perkta, that's a hag. Oh, Mary Lyde, that's an undead nightmare. Like I can reskin a nightmare and give it frost damage instead of fire for that. Oh, the Yule Cat. Well, that's something I'll have to make, but I have to have it. And the Yule Lads, well, those can be mephits. stuff like that. So
Oh,
as I
right.
was like reading these myths, just pulling them in and finding ways that I could put them into an adventure. And then once I see where they fit into D&D stats, like, or what I'm creating, basically reskinned a white dragon to make the Yule Cat. So that's the highest tier monster in there. So that's when I was like, okay, well, this is about the level. So now we can start. Like, this is going to be a tier 3 adventure. Here's all the monsters. Here's where and when they're going to be fighting them. Now let's make a plan.
Wow.
So in part 1, this is going to happen. And sometimes I suck at outlines. So I'll write down all my monsters that are going to be there and what they are going to be. And then I'll write like part 1, part 2, part 3, basically a name of what's going to happen in there. So like there's a hook, and then for the solstices one, part 1 is the bar scene and the cat attack. Part 2, they climb a mountain. And then part 3, they meet the hags. Spoiler alert, there's hags. I like hags. But I could just sit and write straight through if I wanted to. But if I have to go to bed, or sometimes I don't have 12 hours, I'll know where to pick up from just that title of the hags are here. And then I might write like ice damage, difficult terrain, there's a cave, and trolls happen, is what I might write before going to bed. And then the next day I can pick up and be like, oh yeah, there's the trolls in there.
Yeah. That last part sounds similar to my, like I'll feel, usually I'm like, I want to evoke this sort of feeling, or, sometimes it's like, oh, I just was like, actually, now that I think about it, Shape of Madness did not start with Modrons, actually.
Really?
So it was going to be like a kind of, I knew I wanted to make a funhouse dungeon, right? So I just wanted that experience. I wanted to create an experience. That's actually maybe the best way I describe. Like, I'm like, I want my players to have this sort of experience or this sort of feeling. And then it occurred to me that like one great way to do the funhouse, like the ultimate funhouse monster, might be rogue Modrons. But that's interesting to start with monsters first. I usually, in fact, Modrons came earlier in that adventure than my monsters usually do. Usually it's like, I think of the mood and then I think of the adventure hook. Like, well, why would the players care? Right?
I see the hooks almost last.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
always like, what's the through line? Like what's going to make these characters want to go through this stuff? I did not get this feeling from your adventures at all, but some adventures, none of our adventures that we experienced together, but some adventures you'll read them and you're like, it starts with, there's a thing to do. And then if you do that, there's some other stuff that happens. And you're like, but what? I guess, if you're sitting down at a table of D&D, you're like, okay, sure, we'll go do the thing because we're playing D&D and there's a dungeon, go into it. But I always want to, I don't know, that always felt weird to me as a writer.
Yeah. I realized at one point I'd never played an adventure with a dragon in it. And there were a bunch of things coming up. So I pitched dragon adventures to all of them. And then I got accepted into all of them. So I wrote 4 adventures with dragons in them in 1 month.
There you go.
So now I have a lot of dragon adventures out there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes. So the other adventure that's in Ancestry and Culture, Light of Unity, spoiler, there's a dungeon with a dragon. Because when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you put dragons in your dungeons, because I heard you like Dungeons and Dragons, right? So, yeah. What about you, Connor? What's your creative process like?
So I approach it in some ways similar to what other people have said, but in some ways different. Typically where I start is just like many good adventures, I start in a pub. So I will be having a conversation with friends somewhere. There are usually adult beverages consumed, and we talk about things that we like or ideas that we have. And so something will be said. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. Or somebody will say, remember this adventure hook that was left behind in this other adventure and nobody ever picked it up? What do you think would happen in the future for those people? And so we run with that. And that's something that's possible in Adventurers League because it's a giant shared narrative. So we can pick up just hooks that were left out there by other authors or other creatives, and give it take it for a test ride, as it were. But sometimes I'm just looking for original content or something that speaks a little bit more to people, and so I'll start typically with Jungian archetypes or real world folklore, which is sort of in essence working with Jungian archetypes, or the hero's journey, which again is Jungian archetypes. It all goes back to Jungian archetypes. Okay. For me, at least, I start with those experiences that are universal and very human, that resonate with people on that level, and then I'll populate it from there. This is the story I want to tell. Here are the NPCs I want to have involved that everybody can understand, or oh yeah, this reminds me of this person I know, or this character in a movie, or and then go from there with the story. So From Every Winter Spring started with a Jungian archetype, and then worked down to those levels, and took elements from stories that people might have experienced. There's some folklore involved with the old woman in the swamp, Jungian archetype that's heavily used. There's I'm trying to remember the movie, and it's killing me now because I can't remember names when I need to. But there was a movie that was released in, I want to say, in the 80s, about a community of people who were getting toward end of life, and they were trying to re-experience their youth.
Cocoon. No.
I think it was Cocoon. Yeah.
Okay.
Cocoons. Yeah, the alien.
The aliens make them younger.
Yeah, aliens make them young again.
Yeah, and so pull in some of those elements of those stories, which are also timeless and universal, and sort of meld them in to it, in a way that I hope resonates with people. So that was where I went with that story. So if I'm not getting drunk in a bar and think that idea would be cool to tell, then I'm trying to find something that resonates with people, and go with that. Then once I have that idea, people are talking about how do you sit down and write it. I start with an outline, plan it out, get a good idea of what levels I'm looking to tell, because I write mostly D&D, get an idea of what sort of monsters could fit in there, and then go from there. So, but for me, it goes from concept to story, and I guess that might be a little bit different. It might be a little bit different, but there's nothing better or superior or inferior to any of these techniques. They're all wonderful techniques to tell a story. And so it's really cool hearing how other people come up with their ideas.
I both love and hate when I'm on a project where they want us to submit an outline in advance. Like when I'm producing a project, I love it because I know what they're thinking. And if somebody's going down a wrong path, or a path that doesn't work for the project, I can stop them and be like, hey, why don't we redirect to this? But for me, since I don't really outline, once I start writing the outline, I'm like, I might as well just write the fucking thing. Like, you want me to write this whole adventure in like 3 days for you? Fine.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I get that. And I mean, I'm a kind of outliner. I'm a loose outliner. But I mean, like if I'm commissioning art, I want to see roughs before I see the finals, So it makes sense that you'd want to do that if you're commissioning writing too. But yeah, sometimes people don't write in that way. It's really interesting to hear, so the way you were describing, Connor, with the kind of the hero's journey or using these Jungian archetypes. I mean, that I have a friend who is has a graduate degree in playwriting and screenwriting and stuff, and so I hear from him and from other people I hear who work in movies and film and TV that there's a lot of these story structures that people use. I mean, you've also got what is it called, Beating the Story, the Robin D. Laws book, right, about talking about how you make a role-playing game experience have narrative beats from literary theory. and stuff. And those are really interesting ways to think about creating an adventure. That feels like, if that's like, I feel like if that's graduate work, I'm an undergrad still, like, because that's like, ooh, that's really advanced and fancy. I just like thought, I just wanted something, I thought of something cool and wanted to make it cool. And like, I guess I could talk about like how the narrative beats work, but I need to sit down and read that book is what I'm saying.
The rule of cool is awesome, though. You can't knock the rule of cool, because ultimately, you know, if you're very good at telling the rule of cool story, people are going to remember, and they're going to tell stories about that awesome thing that happened in the adventure that you wrote.
Yeah.
So don't knock rule of cool. I don't think there is undergraduate and graduate level creative, right? You know, you tell a story that works, or you tell a story that helps you learn how to tell stories that work.
Right.
Yeah, and I've seen those guides as like guides to DMing or guides to GMing, to incorporate narrative beats into your game. And I think that can turn really quickly into railroading your players, because they don't really want to play your story. I mean, they kind of do, but ultimately you're giving them a framework in which to play their own story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a point where, I mean, one thing we didn't talk about much, we did a little bit when Gilbert, when you were describing some of the stuff you worked on as well. I mean, Jessica, when you mentioned the Powered by the Apocalypse game, is, you know, it is system dependent in a way, right? So, I mean, what the narrative structure of the adventure is going to look like when you're thinking about writing it in advance for other people to play, it just looks so different when you're writing D&D versus when you're writing, I mean, I haven't published anything that isn't D&D or Savage Worlds myself, but I've written, well, I wrote something for Cypher System, but that's very similar narratively. But I've got a Lasers and Feelings hack I just haven't released it. But the idea of writing adventures for something that open-ended, I don't, you know, it's going to be more like guidelines for the MC or GM than anything. And I've never written a GM-less game, right, at all. So, I mean, that...
I have.
Yeah, so you two have, and that's super, or, you know, are working on them. And so that's super cool. And just the very idea of approaching. I will say this, that and I'd love to hear if any of you have tips to help, like what you think would be something that people ought to try if they want to improve themselves as game writers or creators, is like one thing that I would advise. Well, I'll just say a couple. One is find a community of people that you can work with. You don't have to be a collaborator necessarily on your actual titles, though I recommend doing that at least sometimes, but have people that you can talk to about and show your work to, and reciprocally. That's super duper valuable, I think. The second thing is play other games, right? So like, even if you only want to create for D&D, play things other than D&D. And if you want to create indie games, then make sure you're playing a variety of them. And frankly, I would recommend, but I'm not an expert on this, if you want to create indie games, at least check out a couple trad games too, right? You can learn stuff from those too, I think, traditional, you know. And by that, if anyone's not familiar, indie versus trad, right? So D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Pathfinder, all that's traditional gaming, right? Whereas, I don't know, I won't get into its semantics after that, but you get what I'm saying. I find that I learned a lot, like playing whatever, Dungeon World or 13th Age or etc., you know, and thinking about how can I create that. I told you about feeling and experience. It's like, I've had experiences in some of those other games. I don't know how I would create, like, I played Monster Hearts, and you have all of this like intense emotional interactions between players around identity and sexual attraction, and it's like, I don't know how I would even begin to try to create that, or would I even want to in D&D? Probably not. But other things like factions in Urban Shadows, or you know, like hard moves, or the mixed successes when you roll 7 through 9 and Powered by the Apocalypse, like fail forward sort of ideas. Like, how do you can totally incorporate that stuff in D&D, and thinking about that probably makes you a better designer, I bet.
I had I one time had a gaming weekend experience. You know, when we made a donation for charity, but what we did was we got together and we created characters in a fate system for Dungeons and Dragons game, meaning you had to write down an idea for, okay, here is your character's class. You would write down a class, pass it to the left, you'd flip it up, and that's the class you played. How, pick one way that you know each other, write it down, pass it to the right, and so we had a collaborative character building experience, and I ended up with something I would have never played in a million years, and absolutely fell in love with the idea and the concept. And I think I had a richer experience as a result for not having created it entirely whole cloth myself.
Yeah. I want to do a quick shout out here for a YouTube channel called Let's Roll Characters full disclosure, I appeared on this YouTube channel because they're using my ancestry and culture rules to create characters now, which is super awesome. And Christian and Emilio are great. And but each episode is they just roll up a character and it's all random, right? And so they roll like what ancestry, what culture, what class, and then they roll stats and everything. And then they try to tell us, explain the results, So they're like, well, like the one episode I guessed it on, it's like we made I can't remember what it was, like a barbarian with like 8 strength and 9 constitution or something, and 11 dex but 17 charisma, and you're like, what, right? So why would this person become, and that can actually make super cool characters having those. I do find that in general, restrictions, some sort of guidelines like limit helps me be more creative.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any other tips they would recommend for being better creators?
That actually was my tip. I'm just gonna I'll jump in now because I would recommend, if you've never done it before, have somebody give you a guideline or an outline for you to flesh out rather than writing whole cloth your own ideas. I think a lot of times my experiences in conversations with creatives, some folks feel like those guidelines are stifling to the creative process. But learning how to be creative inside of a box sometimes is a greater test of creativity than being creative outside of a box. And so if you haven't ever had to create inside of a box, I highly recommend you try it at some point. And learn, well, I have these limits, but how can I be creative inside these limits? And you learn, I compare it to large brushstrokes versus small brushstrokes in art. If you have an unlimited amount of space, you can do amazing things with large brushstrokes. But when you're when you have constraints, you have to learn how you can be creative with small brushstrokes and still create an evocative piece in a far more limited amount of space and flexibility. And so, some of the most amazing pieces of visual art come in a very, very small frame. If you are familiar with Manet's Haystacks or American Gothic is like this big. It's the size of like a 10 by 12 photograph. But everybody sees big expression in it because the artist became very good at telling a story in a very small space. So I encourage writers to try that. That's my best tip. I think you'll grow as a writer if you take projects occasionally that will allow you, that you have to stick inside a certain framework.
Yeah, that sounds like a great tip.
I would say along with that, join a game jam on Itch if you can. You can. It's free. Just to test the idea of what is a game. Like, what I've been in some just to flex your muscles of like, what is a game to you? When you think of an RPG, what do you think of? Okay, now take the main component of that and throw it out the window. Now make an RPG with what you have left, kind of thing. Or sometimes there'll be a theme, like the first one I ever did was Mythology Jam. So you just make a game in a week or two that has to do with mythology. There are no rules, just go from the ground up. And it's so terrifying and also liberating because there's really no way to do it wrong. It's just you. And it's really fun as a creator to just mess with what a game is, what it can be, and what constraints do you put on yourself, and do they have to be there?
Yeah, that sounds like it. Yeah. So I keep wanting to do this, a game jam, and I haven't yet. The aforementioned, I mentioned it before the break, Linda's Star Drawn Tarot game. I think that came out of a game jam that they did. Ad Astra, I think it was game jam, and then in November, December, Kenna Shaw, I think, ran it. So yeah, you can create great stuff, and I think that game is, I think they're going to maybe get that game published with like a mid-tier game company where they're trying to. The company should publish it if you're listening. Yeah, you can create stuff that ends up,
I think Bluebeard's Bride started as a game jam game.
I was thinking, yeah, things like that, right? Exactly. Anyone else?
Just real quick, I would say, just to kind of add to what everyone has been saying, play a variety of games, and the simpler the better. There's been a lot of games out there that will literally fit on an index card, or that are literally a page, and there are a lot of games where it'll take all of a minute to explain how to play them, and those are, if you've only played traditional games, if you've only played D&D or Pathfinder or even Vampire or what have you, play those games, because it'll really stretch your muscle for how to be narrative in different systems, and maybe bring some of that narration back with you if you decide to bring it into a traditional game space. But also just, as was mentioned, what a game can be. Like, what kind of collaborative storytelling can happen just by pulling Jenga blocks, or just by, rolling a single dice that everybody shares, or what have you. Like, there's some really, really interesting ideas to be had out there, and they're not all encapsulated, with 2Ds and an ampersand.
Yeah, I think that's right. If no one's got anything else, I was thinking we could move to the stars and wishes, so to speak. Would anyone like to touch on? I have 3 or 4 favorite moments picked out, but does anyone have any favorite moments that they wanted to highlight from season 1 of Sigil Spotlight Saturdays? Shall I begin or no?
Yeah, you go first. Lead the way.
Okay. I loved the scene that served as the finale to Curse of the Mariner's Heart, the exorcism scene. I loved it for 2 reasons. One, because it was perfect it was a perfect mesh of. Actually, it was really great because, and it was totally by just serendipity or whatever, accident, whatever, that the adventure we chose to go with first had this gothic feel, and the Ish's apothecary class really just slotted perfectly into that setting and feel, and then Vic's exorcism rules were perfect for the narrative, right, as well. So it felt like, it was like, it would be like rolling a random character and it just falling like, oh wow, I got like all my max stats are what they're supposed to be, and I just accidentally rolled it that way, and it just worked. Everything just fit. And because of that, we really got to see all those features showcased all in one scene in a way that was also, on top of that, super dramatically compelling. The dice were doing exactly what they needed to do to make us think like, oh no, this is going to fail. But then it came through. I think it was a clutch D4 guidance roll or something at the very last minute. They rolled a 4, right? And that's the only way you could succeed. And it worked. So that's one big highlight I'd like to cite, yeah. Anybody got any other ones?
A small one is every time Connor's character would talk about the old gods and the new gods. That was really cute. And a big one is when we were doing, damn it, I'm so bad with the titles. It was, I think there was only 3 of us that day. So me, Connor, and Ish, and we were escorting that old man to the pool, and we stopped and we talked to the hag, and I just it was just such a fun moment, especially I also think that was the first adventure that I had with Dirk.
Yeah.
First time I used Dirk. and it was just so fun. It was just a great experience going through meeting this hag, because I was like, "That's a hag." Like in my head, Vic was like, "That's totally a hag," but Dirk has no idea, so that was a very fun like experience.
The old gods and the new gods, besides pulling into a little bit of the Jungian archetypes, a lot of that came from Neil Gaiman's American Gods. So Neil Gaiman, if you're watching, shout out to you.
Hi, Neil.
Where you take these same concepts that were familiar to ancient peoples, but then translate them into a more modern context. And D&D is no exception to that. When you're talking about the D&D pantheons, you certainly have a series of gods that would be considered old gods, the pre-civilization gods, the gods of nature, the gods of animals, and everything like that. The ones that a druid would be more likely to revere. And then the new gods, the god of valor, the god of self-sacrifice, the others. And so I enjoy playing with that element. I adore that story, American Gods. So anything I can do to pull that in, I'm going to continue to do it. That's wonderful storytelling. Neil Gaiman just knocks it out of the park.
Oh, that makes perfect sense now that you've pointed that out. Yeah, no, that's a great one. And I loved the old gods, new gods stuff too. That was fun.
I just loved Ish's composure every time anyone went, "Well, Anthemina, you're the smart one."
How did he not laugh? How did Ish not laugh constantly?
Yeah.
I mean, in most of these instances, Anthemina was the smart one, but just, I love that we all knew we were so stupid. We're like, Anthemina, you've got this. Like, you'll figure it out. Just tell us what to do.
Yeah.
And shout out to Eugene for just your wonderful description and the way that you set moods and vibes with all of these. Like, I'm sure this was for the other adventures you ran too. I'm so sad I missed Connor's, but you put stuff on the page that like I had in my brain, but I didn't put on the page. And I loved that. So thank you.
Well, that was just trying to do justice to what was written. So I appreciate that. And I totally agree about Anthemina. I love that you played the straight person, so to speak, right? In the comedy team. Mm-hmm. Just the kind of perfect foil to the hijinks ensuing around you, and that you need that.
Yes,
you do.
And it was a really good. There were a lot of really good people to play off of. It worked really well.
Yeah, I Anthemina's character. I adore Anthemina. As much as I tease Anthemina, I would absolutely like to meet Anthemina. And when you have quality storytelling and you have well thought out characters and you have a history, like they almost become real. And so Anthemina is one of those characters that now, if you were to say, here's the situation, Anthemina sitting there, what would she do? I think I might be able to come up with a reasonable idea. Because that character's alive now, and so total props to you, Ish, and Vic for Dirk the same way. I've gotten to know these characters over time, and I believe Milo would be the same way. Gilbert's Milo.
Yeah.
That I almost see them like real people. So that's great. But
I love Milo.
Yeah.
I do too. Oh, I want to come back though to Eugene, because it makes total sense what you're saying, Jess, about Eugene evoking a mood, and then Eugene saying, well, how do I write stories? I start with the mood. So his means of writing a story is very similar to his means of telling a story as a DM, right? They come from the same place.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I have to think more about how I can weaponize this to make more, and I mean that in a good way, like, to make more, create more, I don't know, powerfully. No, by the way, I just want to add in on that, because about the characters, all of you portrayed such fun characters. I mean, we talked about Anthemina's staid persona, and Dirk, Dirk's, unique perspective on food, for example. But not just that, just everything that Dirk had to say and do. And I really loved Milo's simultaneous like bravado and like naivety. That was such a fun combo. You know what I mean? Like ready to fight. Wait a minute, what's an orc again? That sort of back and forth was just a joy. And both of the tabaxi, right, were so much fun to see on display as well. But let's not forget Sildaris.
I think we also have to comment on your great NPCs. I think
yeah.
the Fae
Best sprite
character
voice ever.
with the New York accent was by far one of the best. I mean,
the Feywild by way of New Jersey, yes.
It was so great.
Well, thank you for that. That's a voice I use in my home game, where I play a gnome, up with a pink-haired gnome woman. So that's her voice, actually. I imported. Yeah, that's great. But I also want to call out. So thank you for that. I also want to call out those Sildaris because, there's been several moments where, I loved Sildaris's secret shame that we learned in the adventure, right? Where the memories were had been taken to the grave by someone who died, and the Raven Queen's servants, or these echoes of the Raven Queen, from every winter spring, shared them, and we learned that Sildaris' secret shame is that he'd stolen apples from his neighbor.
Strawberries, right?
Strawberries.
Or was it strawberries? Strawberries. Stolen strawberries. That's right. Stolen strawberries from his neighbor's yard. That was hilarious. So yeah, in all of it. So yeah, I had such a blast. So anybody got any other high points they wanted to mention?
I want to throw out the costume and the work from Connor. Just amazing.
Oh.
Yeah.
I tried to play another game where I talked with a Swedish accent, and I broke every 5 minutes. I couldn't keep it up. I'm theater trained, and I'm just just you maintain that accent so well, and I'm like, I can't even do that.
And let's not, come on, cosplay. I am the kind of person that every game I'm like, I wish I should do that. And I never do, in part because I don't have any costumes. But if I did, I still probably wouldn't do it because
I totally dropped money for season 2 already.
Well, I can't wait to see it.
I've got ears. I've got ears coming, y'all. I got ears.
Yes.
I got
Fantastic.
my Sildaris ears.
Yeah, I can't wait to see those. The furball gears.
The furball gears.
No, just to add on about Sildaris, Anthemina, I suppose she would reluctantly agree that she's probably the brain of the group, but Sildaris is the heart, and we wouldn't be a group without Sildaris. So that's a great boon to our group, is just having Sildaris there, feeling for us when we can't feel, doing for us when we can't do. Sildaris is definitely at the core, but Dirk is amazing too. I have to point that out, and just all of the fact that we are able to focus so much on food because of Dirk, I think brings a new level to everything. But also the element of death too, because I think Dirk does kind of have the perfect gallows humor, and sometimes it's not humor, it's just like, well, no, it's their time to die.
Yeah.
That's fantastic too. I love it every time it comes up.
Yeah, there was a line last session or two where Dirk was like, "It's all right, I'll make sure you have a proper burial." And then people were like, "That doesn't help." And I said, "I said it was going to be proper. It'll be a proper burial. That's supposed to solve the problem, right?"
You don't need the body for a proper burial.
Yeah, it's fine. What's the problem? Yeah, that was good. Well, so here's what's left. Let's talk a little bit about season 2. So nothing's planned, but off screen we can talk about what we want to do. And for those who don't know at home, I'm moving next week, and so that's one reason why we're calling it a season break after about 20 episodes. Yeah, and we'll come back in a few weeks after that. But what would we like to see in season 2? What would each of you, like to see happen in season 2? I will start with one thing. I would like to see, when you're ready, I would like to see some of something you're working on, Gilbert. So what about the rest of you?
I was actually just about to say that. I was like, I love D&D, but let's do something else. Gilbert, give it to me. I want it.
Yeah. I joined this. When it was pitched to me, one of the big selling points was Eugene mentioning, and we're not going to play D&D all the time. We've got this other, and I'm like, awesome! Please show me, because I want to experience stories in another system, and so I can't wait to see what Gilbert's got.
Yeah. When I pitched this, right, it's funny how it worked out. So there was 18 creators that I pitched this to, or that, like I did an interview with and like we were going forward with. And that was the pitch. It's like, well, there's about a third of you aren't D&D people at all. So, and it ended up that almost all of them ended up in Thursday's group because of schedule. I just was like, what's the schedule? So like 3 out of the 5 people in Thursday's group like don't do D&D at all. 2 of the 4 people that are left on the Tuesdays group are primarily like Savage Worlds people, and this is all except for Gilbert, like D&D people. They're like, this is the highest concentration of D&D people, this group. But that doesn't have to stay that way, right? We can play Gilbert stuff. I've got Savage Worlds content. In fact,
you can play Dumpster Fire.
We can play Dumpster Fire. We could play Squad Goals, right? Your PBTA game. Is it PBTA or is that the Lasers and Feelings?
Dumpster Fire's Lasers and Feelings.
Okay.
Squad Goals and A Hero's Journey are both PBTA.
Okay, cool. All right, so that's a little bit about. Does anybody have any other wishes for season 2?
I want to play Gilbert's game, and I want to have more fun with all of you because I love doing this.
Same.
I want to continue learning from all of you. The experience has been amazing, from just learning how the creative process flows through other people, and learning new ways to tell the stories that you want to tell. You can get so much of that. The last 30 minutes where all we do is talk about the game, and not even play the game, just talk about it, has been the most informative time I've ever had as a game creator. And I want a lot more of that. I want to learn from all of these amazing people. Imposter syndrome is real, y'all. It's real, because you look around this, all these other people around here, they're all amazing people. You can learn so much from them.
Yeah, so I just got to throw props to the Kanishaw and Lauren Bryant Monk's tabletop role-playing game Safety Tools. And that's Stars and Wishes is where I learned about that, is from them and from people talking about safety tools. It's so, it's employed in part as a safety tool so people can like say this was problematic, or this made me uncomfortable, or this was something where I, and in a positive way, I really like that you did X, Y, and Z. But I think it's just useful in general, as for exactly the reasons you're pointing out. I love, because we all do that, don't we? After the game, like the game's over, maybe a week later even, you'll be like, oh, that was so cool when you did this or that. That's like part of the game in a way. And so just ending like, all right, you killed the boss. The end. Bye, guys. You're like, can't we like enjoy it for a little while, right? So but it is also very useful to hear people talk that way about something you created. I find it, and so I'm super happy about that. That's one of the reasons why I was like, well, let's go ahead and have like a Stars and Wishes-y kind of workshop-y roundtable at the end of the season, because I've learned a bit about creating just today from each of you. Anybody got any other wishes that they'd like to see in season 2?
This is something that I'm just going to put on myself. It has nothing to do with anyone that isn't myself, but I need to write something that is not just like content. I need to write something that's an adventure, because, I think it's one of those things that I've always been shy to do, and seeing all of you do so many wonderful things, it's really inspired me to give a hand to writing an adventure. And I think that's, if I was going to do it, I think writing it, my first one for all of you, would be the best thing I could ever do.
That would be super awesome. I would be one of your adventures. That'd be super duper cool. Yeah, anybody, I mean, like, I feel free, like, we can always chat on Discord about like work in progress stuff, and share drafts. We talked about like, hey, one thing that one of my tips was, hey, get somebody to look at your stuff. I'm willing to look at your stuff. You know, just so you know, I'd like to think I'm putting the old money where the mouth is there. But yeah, I think that's something we could definitely do for sure. Well, I think that's it. So why don't we go ahead and just very briefly, I guess I've got all of the social media contacts on the overlay so people can find us at those handles. I hope everyone has out there, and you, my fellow players, have a safe, healthy couple weeks. I hope everyone maintains some degree, to what extent possible, of peace of mind and wellness. I wish you all the very best, and I want to thank my players really sincerely for making this a super awesome experience. It was great. That's all I've got. Is any parting words, or shall we say goodbye?
Till next time.
Season 2.
All love you.
All right, everybody. Goodbye.